Hey there, tonight we're diving into the murky world of medieval leech collectors, where the truth is they risked life and limb in bogs and marshes just to supply the bleeding edge of medieval medicine. If these stories help you unwind, I'd love a quick like or subscribe, but only if they're genuinely working for you. I'm curious where in the world you're listening from, so drop your location and local time in the comments. It's amazing seeing our little community span the globe through these historical tales. Now settle in, maybe turn on some white noise or grab your favorite blanket, and let's drift into tonight's story together. In the medieval world, when someone said, "I need a doctor," you probably didn't expect them to reach for a jar full of wriggling leeches. But welcome to the 13th century, where the slimy little creatures weren't just garden pests. They were a cornerstone of medicine. If you're wondering what kind of career involves wading through murky waters to collect bloodsuckers, let's just say it wasn't on the medieval equivalent of LinkedIn's top jobs of the year list. As a leech collector, your workday starts at the crack of dawn, when the mist hangs low over the marshes. Armed with a sack and a sturdy stick, you tramp through the mud, hoping to snag enough leeches to satisfy the local barber surgeon. Why a barber? Because in a world without proper medical schools, the guy who trims your beard might also be the one who drains your blood. Yes, these dual-purpose professionals were your go-to for both a fresh haircut and a bit of therapeutic bloodletting. Now, let's talk about why anyone thought this was a good idea. The medical theory of the time was all about balance, specifically the balance of the four humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. If you were feeling a bit under the weather, it wasn't because of germs. Those wouldn't be a thing until the 19th century. It was because your humours were out of whack. And what better way to balance those humours than by letting a few ounces of blood out? Enter the leech. A single leech could consume up to 10 times its body weight in blood, making it a favourite tool for physicians who believed in the power of bloodletting. These little vampires were in high demand, and a skilled collector might earn a decent living, a few pennies for a dozen leeches, which was enough to buy some bread and maybe a bit of ale at the end of a long day. But before you think this is some medieval gold rush, remember that the job involves standing knee-deep in water, covered in bites, and at the mercy of whatever critters lurked beneath the surface. Glamorous, it was not. The use of leeches in medicine was rooted in ancient practices. Hippocrates, the Greek physician often referred to as the father of medicine, laid the groundwork for humoral theory around 400 BCE. Fast forward to the medieval period, and this theory was gospel. It was like the eat an apple a day mantra of its time, but with more opportunities for fainting. Despite the dubious scientific grounding, the practice of bloodletting persisted for centuries. It was believed to cure everything from headaches to the bubonic plague. In 1163, the Council of Tours even prohibited clergy from performing bloodletting, pushing the task onto barber surgeons and, of course, our leech-loving friends. So, if you're feeling a bit queasy, maybe it's time to reconsider that trip to the medieval spa. Leech collectors were the unsung heroes, or perhaps the unsung fools, of this medical scene. Their work was dangerous, uncomfortable, and certainly not for the squeamish. But without them, the whole system would have collapsed like a medieval Jenga tower. They were the ones who braved the swamps and streams, ensuring that the local physician had enough leeches to keep the community's humours in balance. One can only imagine the conversations at medieval taverns. While others boasted of their day in the fields or a successful hunt, you might have recounted the tale of the leech that got away, or the time you nearly lost a boot in the bog. And let's not forget the occasional local legend about the giant leech that could drain a man dry, stories told to wide-eyed children who'd later find themselves reluctantly following in your footsteps. So why did people keep coming back for more? Part of it was tradition. After all, when something's been done for centuries, questioning it feels like heresy. And then there was the placebo effect. If you parted with a few ounces of blood and somehow felt better afterward, who were you to argue with success? The medieval mind clung to these practices, even as new ideas and discoveries slowly began to challenge the status quo. In this world of superstition and rudimentary science, the leech collector's role was as much about faith as it was about medicine. You weren't just collecting leeches, you were collecting hope, however misplaced it might have been. And as you trudged home at the end of the day, wet and weary. You knew that tomorrow would bring another round of wading through the muck. Because in the end, some jobs are just that vital, even if they're not exactly what you'd call aspirational. So, as you rest your weary feet and dry your mudded clothes, spare a thought for the legacy of those who braved the marshes. They were the ones who kept the wheels of medieval medicine turning, one leech at a time. And while we might chuckle at the absurdity of it all now, remember that in their world, the leech was a lifeline, a slimy, wriggling testament to the human desire to heal, and the lengths we'll go to find a cure. But let's not get too carried away romanticizing the life of a medieval leech collector. Sure, they were the unsung heroes of their time, but they were also knee-deep in the kind of muck that would make a pig farmer blush. Ever wondered where these leech collectors did their shopping? Well, it wasn't at your local medieval market stall. Instead, they waded through the kind of swampy terrain that could swallow a horse, or at least a boot, and a bit of dignity. Leeches loved the marshes, thriving in stagnant water that was murky enough to hide whatever nightmares lurked beneath the surface. These little suckers were the original swamp influencers, drawing collectors from near and far to their soggy domain. The conditions were, shall we say, less than ideal. Picture yourself in a pair of woolen trousers, because synthetic fibers hadn't been invented yet, trudging through waist-high water that was equal parts mud and mystery. And what about the weather? Oh, it had its own charm. If you were lucky, the sun might break through the clouds, turning the marsh into a kind of natural sauna. But more often than not, you'd find yourself drenched by rain that seemed to have a personal vendetta against you. The damp, the cold, and the occasional eel that mistook your leg for a snack were just part of the job description. Forget selfies. The only thing you'd be snapping was the occasional twig underfoot. Now, onto the financial nitty-gritty. How much was a leech worth in medieval times? Well, not quite as much as you'd hope if you were planning on retiring early. A dozen leeches might earn you a few pennies, which sounds like a raw deal until you remember that a loaf of bread cost about a penny. So, in theory, a good day's haul could put food on the table, assuming you didn't lose your appetite after your swampy escapades. The medieval economy was the original gig economy, with leech collectors as its freelance pioneers. You might say they were the Uber drivers of their day, minus the app and the ability to rate their customers. Instead, they had the local barber surgeons who, let's face it, weren't known for their bedside manners. These barber surgeons were the ones who would haggle with you over your haul, trying to shave a penny or two off the going rate. As for social status, well, you could forget about invitations to the king's banquet. Leech collectors occupied a rather humble rung on the social ladder. While knights were off jousting and winning glory, you were knee-deep in muck, hoping to avoid trench foot. But hey, at least you had job security. As long as there were humours to balance and blood to be let, there would always be a need for leeches, and by extension, a need for you. Even so, the life of a leech collector was not without its peculiar charm. You might find yourself swapping stories with fellow collectors over a pint of ale at the local tavern, each tale more outrageous than the last. Did you hear about the one that got away? You might say, prompting groans and laughter from your companions. And let's not forget the folklore that surrounded your craft. Tales of giant, man-eating leeches were whispered in hushed tones, a mix of cautionary tale and fish story. These legends served to entertain, sure, but they also reinforced your role as both a brave soul and a bit of a fool. Who else would willingly venture into the beast's lair, after all? At the end of the day, you might have been muddy, cold, and more than a little bit itchy, but you also had a sense of purpose. You were contributing to the medieval medical machine, keeping the balance of humours in check. And while your name might not go down in history, your contribution to the health of your community was undeniable. As you trudged home, sack full of leeches slung over your shoulder, the sun dipping low in the sky, you knew that tomorrow would bring another day of wading through the mire. But for now, you could rest easy, knowing that you'd done your part in the grand, messy tapestry of medieval life. Stay tuned, because the story of leech collecting isn't over yet. There's more to uncover about the myths and realities of this peculiar profession, not to mention the larger forces at play in this curious chapter of history. So, hang on to your mud-caked boots, because the adventure is just beginning. But hold your horses, or in this case, your leech-laden sack, because the story of leech collecting is about to take a turn down a winding, slippery path. You see, while you were busy wrangling leeches from their muddy lairs, a whole different kind of wrangling was happening across Europe. Picture Paris, the city of light, centuries before it earned that nickname. Even back in medieval times, Paris was a bustling hub, and it had a thirst for leeches that would put any vampire to shame. We're talking millions of leeches annually, a number baffling enough to make you wonder if the Seine was populated by a secret society of leech enthusiasts. This voracious demand wasn't just a Parisian quirk, though. Leeches were the medieval equivalent of over-the-counter medicine, and the whole of Europe was in on the act. From the British Isles to the Italian peninsula, if there was blood to be let, a leech was ready to do the job. The logistics of getting these little bloodsuckers from marsh to market created an entire industry, a trade network that stretched across the continent like some bizarre circulatory system. Now, transporting leeches wasn't as simple as tossing a sack over your shoulder and skipping down the road. These weren't your garden variety cargo. They were delicate, finicky, and prone to dying if not handled with care. The medieval postal service was more snail mail than express delivery, so leech transport required a deft touch and a keen sense of timing. And let's not forget the risk of losing your slimy cargo along the way. One wrong jostle, and you'd have a very unpleasant wriggling surprise on your hands, or worse, your feet. Imagine explaining that to a disgruntled barber surgeon who'd been waiting for his shipment. Carrying these aquatic hitchhikers meant keeping them damp, cool, and contained, an odyssey in itself. Collectors and traders would line their barrels with wet moss or river plants, creating a makeshift habitat that was one part swamp, one part medieval aquarium. The goal was to keep the leeches alive and kicking until they reached their destination, a task easier said than done when you're jostling along bumpy medieval roads. Sure, we romanticized the idea of the open road, but in reality, it was more pothole-central than scenic route. The leech trade was a high-risk, high-reward operation. Get it right, and you could make a tidy sum. Get it wrong, and your investment would literally slip through your fingers. This precarious balance made the trade networks a curious mix of ingenuity and desperation. Traders were known to use everything from horse-drawn carts to riverboats, adapting their methods to the terrain as they navigated the patchwork of medieval Europe. They knew the value of their cargo, and they were willing to go to great lengths to protect it. Think of them as the medieval equivalent of a UPS driver, but with a cargo that could double as a horror movie prop. But let's not gloss over the dark side of this aquatic gold rush. The demand for leeches was so intense that it led to over-harvesting, a concept that might sound modern, but was very much a medieval reality. In their quest to supply the market, collectors decimated local leech populations, leading to shortages that sent prices soaring. This wasn't just an economic problem. It was an environmental one. Wetlands and marshes were stripped of their natural balance, a cautionary tale of what happens when humans take more than nature can give. It's a stark reminder that even centuries ago, people grappled with the consequences of their environmental footprint, though they probably weren't writing climate policy while wearing mud-caked boots. In short, the life of a leech collector was a swirling mix of biology, economics, and sheer survival instinct. Every day was a balancing act between nature's bounty and humanity's insatiable demand, a tightrope walk that could tip into disaster at any moment. If you think today's supply chain issues are a headache, imagine managing a network where your product could literally crawl away. And yet, through all this chaos, the legend of the leech collector endured. These unsung heroes, or perhaps heroic fools, were essential cogs in the medieval medical machine. Without them, the whole system would have sputtered to a halt, leaving barber surgeons high and dry, and patients with humors run amok. As you picture these medieval traders, navigating the swampy backroads of Europe with their squirming cargo, you can't help but admire their tenacity. They were the original road warriors, battling mud, muck, and medieval market forces, all for the sake of a slimy little creature that, against all odds, managed to stitch itself into the fabric of history. So, as this chapter of the Leech saga draws to a close, remember that the story isn't over yet. There's more to uncover about these peculiar practitioners of medieval medicine, more to learn about the myths and realities that shaped their world. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the murky waters of history, where every leech has a tale to tell and every collector a story worth hearing. So, as we dive deeper into the murky waters of history, it's time to peel back the layers of medieval medicine and its almost obsessive reliance on leech therapy. You see, The medieval mindset wasn't just about draining blood. It was about balancing the universe's metaphysical scales. Picture this: your local barber surgeon with a straight razor in one hand and a jar of leeches in the other, ready to tackle everything from headaches to the plague. But why did people put so much faith in these slippery little creatures? Let's start with the myths. Medieval medicine, like your favorite fantasy series, was rife with captivating yet misguided beliefs. The practice of bloodletting, of which leeching was a part, was rooted in the ancient Greek humoral theory. According to Hippocrates, those four pesky humors, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, needed to be in equilibrium for a person to be healthy. The idea was that excess blood caused fevers and inflammation, so removing it was akin to hitting the reset button on your body's chemistry. But here's the kicker: there was less evidence backing these practices than there is for Bigfoot sightings. Despite this, the placebo effect was powerful. People felt better after losing a pint or two, not because they'd been cured, but because they believed they had been. Anecdotal evidence was king, and if you didn't faint during a session, you might just swear by the barber's blade. Primary sources from the time, like the writings of medieval physician Guy de Chauliac, reveal some of the era's more bizarre medical practices. Chauliac, who was a big deal in the 14th century, wrote extensively on surgery and medicine, often suggesting techniques that would make a modern med student's skin crawl. He wasn't exactly a leech fanatic, but he did advocate for bloodletting as a general practice, proof that even the best minds were swayed by tradition. So why did the myth of the leech persist for so long? Economic and social factors played a massive role. In a world where survival was uncertain, sticking with tried-and-true methods, however flawed, was less risky than experimenting with unproven alternatives. And don't forget the political landscape. With the church's influence over education, medical knowledge was often filtered through a spiritual lens, reinforcing the status quo. The romantic image of leeches as miracle workers glosses over the grim reality. Medieval medicine was less a fountain of youth and more a game of Russian roulette. The average life expectancy hovered around 30 to 40 years, and the rampant spread of diseases like the Black Death didn't do any favors. In a society where mortality was omnipresent, the illusion of control through medical practices was oddly comforting. But not everyone was on board with the whole leech craze. As early as the 12th century, a growing undercurrent of skepticism was beginning to surface. Thinkers like Avicenna, the Persian polymath, began questioning the validity of humoral theory. In his seminal work, The Canon of Medicine, Avicenna advocated for observation and reasoning over dogma, planting the seeds for a more scientific approach to medicine. His ideas spread slowly, like a medieval meme, but they marked the start of a seismic shift. The rise of universities in the late medieval period also contributed to this intellectual awakening. Institutions like the University of Bologna and the University of Paris became hotbeds for debate and the exchange of ideas. While still steeped in tradition, these centers of learning encouraged a more empirical approach to medicine. Slowly but surely, the tide began to turn against the uncritical acceptance of ancient doctrines. Yet change was glacial. It wasn't until the Renaissance that the medical world truly began to embrace the scientific method. Figures like Andreas Vesalius, who published his groundbreaking anatomical work, De Humani Corporis Fabrica, in 1543, would challenge centuries-old beliefs. Vesalius, with his meticulously detailed drawings, demonstrated that human anatomy was far more complex than previously thought. His work was a dagger in the heart of humoral theory, ushering in a new era of medical understanding. In the meantime, medieval physicians continued to ply their trade, leeches in tow, doing their best to navigate the murky waters of human health. The allure of the leech, with its promise of restored balance, was hard to resist. But as skepticism grew, so too did the awareness that relying solely on tradition was as dangerous as leeching in a thunderstorm. The tale of the leech collector, then, is not just a story of muddy boots and marshy toil. It's a reflection of humanity's ongoing struggle to make sense of the world, to find meaning in the face of uncertainty. And while the medieval era may seem distant, its lessons are as relevant today as they were centuries ago. The intersection of myth and reality, of faith and evidence, continues to shape our understanding of medicine and human nature. So, as we tread the soggy path from past to present, let's keep an eye out for the next chapter in the saga of leech therapy. The story isn't over yet, and there are still plenty of myths to debunk and realities to uncover. Stay tuned for more tales from the tangled web of history, where every leech has a lesson and every collector a cautionary tale. And here we are, teetering on the edge of the medieval era's twilight, where the leech's slippery grip on medicine finally began to slacken. But before we sweep them under the historical rug, let's glance at how the leech managed to wriggle its way into the annals of medical legacy. You might think the advent of modern science would have been a swift guillotine for leech therapy, yet these little bloodsuckers somehow found a way to stick around. It's like that time you thought bell-bottoms were gone for good, only to see them struck back onto the fashion scene. By the 19th century, the leech's role in medicine was in its heyday, though the world was starting to wise up. France alone imported an astounding 30 million leeches annually during the 1830, but soon the scales began to tip. On the front lines of this medical revolution was Pierre-Charles Alexander Louis, a French physician who dared to question the status quo. Louis championed a more empirical approach, a precursor to modern evidence-based medicine. His studies on bloodletting techniques suggested that they were about as effective as using a sieve to hold water, revolutionary in an age when traditional practices were rarely questioned. Then there was the rise of germ theory. In the late 19th century, Louis Pasteur and Robert Koch were busy proving that microbes, not humors, were the culprits behind many diseases. This was the equivalent of history's biggest mic drop, utterly transforming medical practice. Suddenly, the idea of balancing bodily fluids with leeches seemed quaint, like insisting on using a typewriter in the age of laptops. But let's not toss the leech out with the proverbial bathwater just yet. Despite their decline in mainstream medicine, leeches found a surprising niche in modern therapies. Thanks to their anticoagulant saliva, which contains herudin, these creatures became useful in microsurgeries and the treatment of venous congestion. For instance, when reattaching severed fingers or ears, surgeons might employ leeches to improve blood flow and prevent clotting. It's a strange twist of fate that sees these medieval leftovers playing a vital role in surgeries worthy of a sci-fi novel. So, how did we get from medieval mud to medical marvel, you ask? Part of it is the cyclical nature of human innovation. We tend to rediscover old solutions once new contexts make them relevant again. It's like rummaging through your grandmother's attic, only to find that her vintage vinyl collection is now worth a small fortune. In the mid-20th century, researchers began to see the potential of leech saliva in anticoagulation, a discovery that gave these diminutive doctors a second life. But let's not sugarcoat their journey. The road from medieval necessity to niche tool wasn't paved with gold. The leech's reputation had taken quite a beating by the time science caught up. For every leech used effectively in surgery today, there's a history of overuse and misunderstanding. It's a testament to both human stubbornness and ingenuity that these creatures remain relevant, albeit in more specialized roles. Here's where things get introspective. Would you trade your cozy desk job, complete with ergonomic chair and overpriced coffee, for the muck and mire of medieval leech collecting? Sure, the tales you'd spin would be the stuff of pub legend, but let's face it, the conditions were far from ideal. While the medieval economy offered few options, today's job market, filled with digital nomads and gig workers, provides a stark contrast. The leech collector's life was a constant battle against the elements and societal norms, a far cry from the structured chaos of modern employment. But there's a silver lining to this muddy tale. The story of leeches serves as a reminder of medicine's humble beginnings, a narrative of trial, error, and eventual triumph. It's easy to scoff at the past, but remember, today's breakthroughs stand on the shoulders of those who dared to venture into murky waters, both literal and metaphorical. The medieval world wasn't just a time of superstition and ignorance. It was also an era of resilience and resourcefulness. In the end, leeches teach us a valuable lesson about adaptability. They have survived the rise and fall of empires, the skepticism of scientific revolutions, and the ever-changing tides of medical opinion. Their legacy is a testament to the tenacity of both nature and human innovation, an unlikely partnership forged in the swamps of history. So, as you sip your artisanal latte or tap away at your keyboard, spare a thought for the leech collector trudging through the marsh. Their story, though rooted in mud and mystery, is a part of the grand tapestry of human history. It's a tale that reminds us of our capacity for change, for learning, and for finding value in the most unexpected places. After all, history is more than just a series of dates and events. It's a living, breathing narrative, much like the leech, always ready to surprise us with its unexpected bite. In the vast, unending expanse of the Mongolian steppe, a place where the wind seems to gossip about the countless stories it's witnessed, a child named Temujin was born in 1162. Now, if you're imagining a grand palace or a fancy nursery for this future titan, you're in for a surprise. Temujin's first cries echoed not through opulent halls, but a humble yurt. Think of it as an early version of a studio apartment made from felt and wood, situated in a neighborhood with zero amenities except for, well, more grass. From the get-go, Temujin's life was less Game of Thrones and more Survivor, Mongolian edition. His father, Yesuje, was a chieftain of the Borjigin clan, which sounds prestigious until you realize that being a chieftain didn't come with a 401, K, or dental. Instead, it came with the constant threat of betrayal and backstabbing, which is exactly what happened. Yesuje's life took a nosedive after he was poisoned by a rival clan, the Tartars, who clearly didn't get the memo about not playing with your food. Temujin was only 9 at the time, an age when most kids worry about losing their favorite toy, not their entire way of life. Suddenly, the family status went from local leaders to outcasts. Yesuje's death left them in the lurch, and the clan, demonstrating their loyalty, or lack thereof, decided that a widow and her children were too much of a liability, so they abandoned them like an outdated smartphone app. Now you might think, how did Temujin's family survive? Well, they didn't just sit around waiting for a knight in shining armor. Temujin's mother, Holan, was a powerhouse. She gathered her kids and taught them how to scavenge for food, hunt small animals, and generally avoid becoming a meal themselves. Picture a medieval survival boot camp, but with fewer protein bars and more root vegetables. Life on the steppe was brutal and unforgiving. Temperatures could swing from boil an egg on the ground in summers to freeze your nose off during the bitter winters. Food wasn't delivered via apps. It was caught, gathered, or stolen. The Mongolian steppe was a place where only the tough survived, and this harsh environment wasn't about to roll out the welcome mat for Temujin and his siblings. Amidst these hardships, Temujin learned a crucial lesson. Trust is a rare commodity. This was hammered home when his own tribe turned their backs on his family. But rather than sink into despair, he did what any resourceful future conqueror would do. He adapted, learned, and figured out how to play the long game. He also discovered that charisma could be a weapon as powerful as any sword. This kid was all about building alliances, one friendship at a time, like networking at the most extreme job fair ever. One of the first signs of Temujin's knack for turning enemies into allies came when he befriended Jamaka, a blood brother and fellow future power player. With Jamaka, he made a pact of brotherhood, swapping arrows and promises. This wasn't just a childhood friendship, but a strategic alliance. Think less playdates and more plodding world domination during recess. But let's not romanticize things too much. Temujin's early life was as much about survival as it was about strategy. The Mongolian steppe wasn't a place of idyllic horseback rides and lazy afternoons. It was a world where losing a horse could be a matter of life and death, and where every horizon held potential danger. The skills Temujin honed in these formative years, riding, hunting, and the art of war, were not hobbies but necessities. By the time Temujin hit his teenage years, he was already a seasoned survivor. But it wasn't just the physical endurance he developed. It was his unyielding will to rise above his circumstances. He understood the power of unity and the strength in numbers long before he had the means to act on it. This was a guy who saw every setback as a setup for a comeback. And then there was the matter of reclaiming his rightful place in the world. You see, being abandoned by his tribe wasn't just a personal slight. It was a challenge, one he intended to meet head-on. He didn't just want to survive. He wanted to thrive, to carve out a place where he and his family wouldn't be at the mercy of others' whims. So, while the legend of Genghis Khan often paints him as a ruthless conqueror, let's not forget that it all started here, with young Temujin, a boy who refused to let the world break him, a boy who turned the hardships of the steppe into the foundation of a future empire, a boy who, abandoned and alone, began to dream of uniting all Mongols under one banner, a dream that would eventually become an unstoppable reality. And there you have it, the humble beginnings of Temujin, the boy who would become Genghis Khan. A story of loss, resilience, and a little bit of watch me prove you wrong. Stay tuned, because this is just the opening act of a saga that's about to get a whole lot more epic. As Temujin stood on the brink of his destiny, the Mongolian steppe was less a blank canvas and more a chaotic abstract painting. Think of it as a high-stakes chessboard, but instead of pieces, there were feuding tribes, and the stakes were life, death, and the occasional horse raid. Uniting these tribes was like herding cats with a penchant for warfare and distrust. But Temujin wasn't just any herder. He was a visionary with a knack for turning chaos into opportunity. The first move on his path to unity came with a marriage proposal. And no, this wasn't a romantic subplot. At the age of 16, Temujin married Bert of the Angerat tribe, a union that was as strategic as it was personal. Bert brought with her not only a dowry, but a potential alliance with her powerful tribe. This wasn't just a meet-cute, it was a power play. In the world of steppe politics, marriage was less about love letters and more about letters of intent. But before you start thinking this is a fairy tale, the honeymoon was short-lived. Bert was soon captured by the Merkit tribe, a rival group with a grudge against Temujin's family. If this sounds like something out of a soap opera, remember, this was a place where revenge was a family tradition. Temujin, determined not to lose his queen, rallied a rescue party that included his blood brother Jamaka and the formidable Targrol, the Khan of the Kerates. Together, they launched a raid that not only freed Bert, but also showcased Temujin's growing influence. It was a clear message to the steppe. Temujin was a force to be reckoned with. Speaking of Jamaka, their relationship was the kind of complex drama that ancient history often scripts. They were blood brothers, sharing a bond that was both profound and politically advantageous. But as often happens in power dynamics, this friendship was bound for turbulence. Jamaka, a traditionalist, believed in the old ways of tribal hierarchy, while Temujin envisioned a new order, one where meritocracy trumped aristocracy. Their ideological split was the crack that would eventually widen into a chasm. And here's where things get interesting. While many legends paint Jamaka as the villain in Temujin's story, the reality is more nuanced. They each represented different visions for the Mongols. Jamaka the guardian of the past, and Temujin the harbinger of change. Their eventual fallout resulted in a civil war of sorts, a battle of ideologies played out with actual battles. In 1186, Temujin was elected Khan of the Mongols, a title that was as much about recognition as it was about the support of key allies. Jamaka, not one to take this lying down, declared himself Gur Khan, a title meaning universal ruler, and launched an attack against Temujin. The ensuing conflict was brutal, with Jamaka's forces initially gaining the upper hand. But Temujin, the master of adaptability, leveraged his keen understanding of the political landscape. He knew that strength didn't just come from numbers, it came from loyalty. He began to offer positions of power not based on noble birth, but on loyalty and ability. This was revolutionary. In a world where lineage often dictated rank, Temujin was flipping the script. He was building a meritocracy, a concept that made him both popular and a target. His approach to warfare was equally innovative. Temujin reorganized his army into decimal units, a system that allowed for better coordination and discipline. Imagine a military version of a modular smartphone, flexible, efficient, and way ahead of its time. This wasn't just a tactical maneuver. It was a complete overhaul of military structure, transforming a collection of tribes into a formidable fighting force. Now, let's unravel the economic motivations behind Temujin's campaigns. Uniting the Mongols wasn't just a political dream, it was an economic necessity. The steppe was a harsh environment, and resources were scarce. By bringing the tribes under one banner, Temujin was creating a network that could share resources, trade effectively, and defend against external threats. This was about creating stability in a place where survival often depended on the luck of the draw. Temujin's raids against settled societies were as much about survival as they were about expansion. The wealth of the sedentary civilizations, from the silk of China to the goods of the Khwarezmian Empire, was a tempting prize. But it wasn't just about plundering riches. It was about accessing trade routes and establishing economic security. Grain, livestock, and textiles, these were the real treasures. Forget gold and jewels. In the steppe, food and fabric were the real currency. Yet, it wasn't all blood and conquest. Temujin knew the power of diplomacy. He forged alliances through marriage, fostered trade relations, and used intelligence networks to gain the upper hand. One of his more surprising diplomatic moves was offering protection to traders along the Silk Road, ensuring safe passage and boosting commerce. This wasn't just about being the nice guy. It was a smart economic strategy that strengthened his power base. And then, there was the curious case of the Khwarezmian Empire, a wealthy and powerful state that spanned much of modern-day Iran and Central Asia. In 1218, Temujin sent emissaries to establish trade relations, a move that was more about economic pragmatism than diplomatic courtesies. But when his ambassadors were executed, Temujin's response was swift and brutal. The ensuing invasion wasn't just a punitive expedition. It was a calculated move to control key trade routes and resources. Economic motivations were never far from the surface in Temujin's campaigns. As we peel back the layers of Temujin's unification efforts, it's clear that his strategies were a blend of the ruthless and the diplomatic, the visionary and the practical. He wasn't just building an empire. He was constructing a new world order on the steppe, one where unity brought strength and prosperity. Temujin was a man who understood that power was multifaceted. Military might, economic control, political savvy, and social innovation all played a part. So, as we leave Temujin on the cusp of becoming Genghis Khan, let's remember that his story is as much about forging alliances as it is about forging swords. It's a tale of a man who took the fragmented tribes of the steppe and transformed them into a unified force that would change the world. But the saga doesn't end here. There are still new horizons to conquer, both literally and figuratively. Stay tuned as the legend continues to unfold, with more battles, more alliances, and more of that Temujin magic. With Temujin now morphing into the powerhouse known as Genghis Khan, it was clear that the Mongolian steppe was just the beginning of his ambitious vision. But how exactly did he transform a ragtag bunch of warriors into an unstoppable force that made even the Great Wall of China look like a quaint garden fence? Well, hold onto your saddles, because we're about to delve into the tactical brilliance and organizational wizardry that made Genghis Khan the ultimate disruptor of his time. Let's start with the siege of Beijing in 1215. Picture this: the Mongols, a nimble cavalry force accustomed to the open plains, facing the daunting task of conquering a fortified city surrounded by thick walls and bristling with defenders. Most would see an insurmountable challenge, but Genghis saw an opportunity for innovation. Think of it as the historical equivalent of a startup entering an established market and flipping the script on everything you thought you knew. Genghis's approach was simple yet devastatingly effective. He deployed psychological warfare long before it became a buzzword. The Mongols would encircle a city, cut off supplies, and wait. Patience, as they say, is a virtue, especially when the enemy is slowly starving. But it wasn't all about waiting. Genghis understood that to defeat a fortified city, you had to think outside the box, or in this case, outside the wall. He employed siege engines, including catapults and trebuchets, like the medieval artillery experts they were. These weren't your average slingshots. They could hurl massive stones or incendiary bombs over walls with pinpoint accuracy. It's as if Genghis took a page straight out of a modern military strategy playbook, except he was writing it in real time. The Mongols even diverted rivers to flood parts of the city, turning nature itself into a weapon. Talk about taking the term "go with the flow" to a whole new level. Once inside, the Mongols' tactics were ruthless and efficient. They didn't just conquer, they subjugated. Genghis understood the power of fear as a tool of control. Word would spread like wildfire: defy the Mongols and face annihilation. Surrender, and you might just live to see another day. This reputation was a force multiplier, allowing a relatively small Mongol force to compel vast regions to capitulate without a fight. It was the ultimate in brand recognition, only this brand was associated with unstoppable might. But Genghis wasn't just about brute force. He was a logistics mastermind. which brings us to his greatest non-military innovation, the Mongol postal system, or YAM. Imagine an empire-spanning communication network that made the Pony Express look like a local pizza delivery service. YAM stations were established every 25 to 30 miles, complete with fresh horses and provisions, enabling messages to travel at lightning speed across vast distances. This wasn't just about sending love letters. It was the lifeline of the empire, ensuring that orders, intelligence, and news flowed seamlessly through the Mongol domains. The YAM system also served as a conduit for trade and cultural exchange. In many ways, it was the precursor to the modern highway system, fostering connectivity and economic growth. Traders, diplomats, and even spies could travel with relative safety and speed, creating a network that supported the empire's infrastructure. It was Genghis's version of the internet, connecting people, ideas, and goods long before the age of fiber optics. And speaking of trade, Genghis understood its economic power. He actively protected the Silk Road, ensuring that merchants could traverse his territories without fear of banditry. In return, the merchants paid taxes to the Mongols, contributing to the empire's wealth. This wasn't just altruism. It was a strategic move to ensure a steady flow of goods and revenue. The Mongols might have been seen as barbarians, but economically they were more akin to savvy venture capitalists. Now, let's debunk a few myths. The Mongols have often been portrayed as mindless hordes sweeping across the land, but that's far from the truth. Genghis didn't just rely on numbers. He relied on strategy, adaptability, and the ability to exploit his enemies' weaknesses. His army was a well-oiled machine, structured into units of 10 Arban, hundreds Zun, thousands Mingan, and tens of thousands Tumen. This allowed for incredible flexibility and coordination on the battlefield, akin to a modern decentralized network. Each unit could operate independently or as part of a larger force, a revolutionary concept at the time. Moreover, the Mongol army was a meritocracy. Genghis promoted based on skill and loyalty, not birthright. This approach not only fostered fierce loyalty, but also ensured that the most capable individuals led his forces. Think of it as a talent-driven tech company, where the best ideas rise to the top, regardless of who came up with them. Merit, rather than pedigree, was the key to advancement, a radical departure from the aristocratic norms of the day. Genghis's tactical genius also extended to intelligence gathering. Before launching an invasion, he would send scouts to gather information about the terrain, climate, and enemy forces. Knowledge was power, and Genghis wielded it with precision. His spies infiltrated enemy territories, spreading disinformation and gathering crucial insights. It's like he had a medieval version of Google Analytics, always one step ahead of his rivals. Yet, for all his military prowess, Genghis knew that true power lay in uniting people under a shared vision. He crafted a legal code, the Yasa, which was as much about administration as it was about justice. The Yasa established laws for everything from military conduct to social behavior, creating a sense of order and unity across the diverse peoples of the empire. It was the glue that held the Mongol world together, a common framework that transcended tribal and cultural boundaries. As we delve deeper into the saga of Genghis Khan, it's evident that his genius wasn't just about conquest. It was about creating an empire that was as innovative as it was formidable. His legacy is a testament to the power of vision, strategy, and the art of turning adversity into opportunity. And while his methods might have been harsh, they were undeniably effective. Genghis Khan didn't just change the map. He rewrote the rules of engagement, leaving an indelible mark on history. So, as we wrap up this chapter of our journey, let's remember that the story of Genghis Khan is more than a tale of conquest. It's a lesson in leadership, innovation, and the relentless pursuit of a dream. Our story isn't over yet, so stay tuned for more exploits, more strategies, and more of that Mongol magic that continues to fascinate and inspire. And so, as the dust of conquest settled, Genghis Khan turned his gaze inward, focusing on the nuts and bolts of empire building, the kind that doesn't make it into epic poems, but is critical for keeping the whole show running. It's easy to picture him as just a conqueror, but let's not overlook his genius for governance, shall we? Imagine a world where your empire spans over 9 million square miles. That's about 23,300,000 square kilometers for our metric friends, and includes a mishmash of cultures, languages, and customs. It's like trying to unite a team of cats and dogs to perform synchronized swimming. Ambitious, to say the least. Central to Genghis's strategy was the Yasa, his code of law. Now, don't let the romanticized notion of a dusty scroll fool you. The Yasa was less about elaborate legalese and more about pragmatic governance. It was like a Swiss army knife of laws, simple, versatile, and utterly effective. The Yasa covered everything from military discipline to civil disputes, ensuring that justice wasn't just a concept, but a lived experience. It was the glue that held his sprawling empire together, a common set of rules that transcended tribal affiliations. This was more than just law, it was a framework for unity. So, what made the Yasa so special? For starters, it emphasized loyalty and merit over birthright. In a world dominated by aristocratic hierarchies, this was revolutionary. Picture a medieval version of Silicon Valley, where talent and innovation were the currency of success. Genghis understood that to govern effectively, he needed capable leaders, not just those born into the right families. This approach was a game changer, creating an empire where ability mattered more than ancestry. But the Yasa wasn't just about internal matters. It also laid down laws for trade, marriage, and even the treatment of prisoners. Genghis knew that to sustain an empire, you needed more than just soldiers. You needed commerce, diplomacy, and a bit of cultural finesse. His laws encouraged trade by protecting merchants and ensuring safe passage across the empire. This wasn't just a kind gesture. It was economic pragmatism in action. By safeguarding the Silk Road and other trade routes, Genghis ensured a steady flow of goods and revenue. And let's face it, even a warrior needs a little retail therapy now and then. Now, onto the myth-busting bit. The Mongols are often portrayed as ruthless barbarians, but that's a one-dimensional caricature. Sure, they could be brutal, but they were also surprisingly progressive in matters of religion. Genghis Khan was all about religious tolerance, a concept that might sound modern, but was very much alive in his empire. He understood that forcing a single belief system on a diverse population was a recipe for disaster. Instead, he allowed freedom of worship, recognizing that spiritual harmony was just as important as political stability. So, while swords clashed on the battlefield, temples, mosques, and monasteries thrived under his rule. It was a live-and-let-live approach that ensured peace and cooperation across his realms. Economically, Genghis was a mastermind. He implemented a taxation system that was both fair and efficient, a rarity in those days. The Mongol tax was fixed and predictable, unlike the arbitrary demands of other empires. This consistency encouraged trade and investment. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a stable interest rate, attracting merchants like moths to a flame. And merchants meant money, which meant resources for further expansion. Genghis had essentially created a self-sustaining economic model where conquest fed commerce and commerce fed conquest. Of course, not everything was sunshine and rainbows. The Yasa was strictly enforced, and punishment could be severe. Theft, for example, was met with the death penalty, a harsh but effective deterrent in a time when resources were precious and trust was scarce. It was a world where actions had swift and often brutal consequences, ensuring that law and order were more than just theoretical ideals. And let's not forget the power of espionage. Genghis was a maestro of intelligence gathering, employing spies to maintain a pulse on the empire's heartbeat. Information was power, and Genghis wielded it like a master conductor. His spies weren't just about uncovering plots. They were integral to the administration, feeding insights back to the Khan about the needs and sentiments of his people. This network was the ancient equivalent of a modern-day intelligence agency, keeping the empire informed and adaptable. But here's the kicker. Genghis understood that an empire is only as strong as its weakest link. He was constantly innovating, adapting his strategies to meet new challenges. Whether it was developing new siege tactics or integrating conquered peoples into his army, he was always a step ahead, ensuring that the empire was not just a flash in the pan, but a lasting force. As we wrap up this segment, it's clear that Genghis Khan was more than a conqueror, was a visionary leader who understood the complexities of governance. He wasn't just building an empire, he was crafting a legacy, one that was as much about creating a sustainable society as it was about military might. The Mongol Empire wasn't just a collection of conquered lands. It was a testament to the power of law, trade, and tolerance. And while the shadow of his sword loomed large, it was the strength of his vision that truly changed the world. Hold onto your hats, because there's more to this story. A tale of resilience, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of a dream. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the saga of Genghis Khan, exploring the intricacies of his rule and the legacy he left behind. As history unfolds, we'll uncover more of the magic and mayhem that defined the Mongol Empire and its enigmatic leader. And so, with the echoes of empire still resounding, Genghis Khan's legacy began to cement itself in the annals of history. But let's not get ahead of ourselves by romanticizing what was essentially a chaotic patchwork of power grabs and political intrigue. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, let's bust one myth right away. He didn't fall off a horse in some dramatic cinematic fashion. No, the truth is far less theatrical and more mysterious, wrapped in the enigma of an ordinary death that sparked extraordinary tales. With Genghis's departure, reins of the Mongol Empire didn't just tumble to the ground like a dropped baton in a relay race. Oh no, they were carefully placed in the hands of his descendants, each eager to put their own spin on the empire he so meticulously crafted. His third son, Urgide, took the helm as the Great Khan, and if history teaches us anything, it's that succession is never just about passing on a crown. It's more like handing over a hot potato with the stakes cranked up to 11. Urgide continued his father's ambitious expansion, and by the time he was done, the Mongol Empire stretched from the banks of the Danube in Europe to the coasts of the Korean peninsula. That's about 700 kilometers, or 6,000 miles of territory, a feat that would make even the most seasoned travel bloggers jealous. Under Urgide, the empire didn't just grow in size. It sprawled across diverse cultures and economies, creating a superhighway of trade and exchange. Think of it as the medieval version of globalization, only with fewer corporate buzzwords and more horse archers. But let's zoom in on the nitty-gritty of this expansion. The Mongols under Urgide weren't just about brute force. They were keenly aware of the economic and political landscapes. They didn't just conquer cities, they revitalized them. Take Karakorum, the capital established by Urgide. It became a bustling hub of commerce and culture, a melting pot where merchants, scholars, and artisans converged. Forget the stereotype of nomadic raiders. These were sophisticated statesmen with a keen eye on the balance sheets. Now, let's talk about succession, because if there ever was a hotbed for drama, it's the transfer of power. Following Urgide's death in 1241, the empire faced a leadership vacuum that could rival any modern political thriller. Enter Guillotine, Urgide's son, whose reign was marked by a fair share of intrigue and conflict, largely because he had to deal with a Mongol version of office politics. You know, the kind where your co-workers are also your rivals, and the stakes are the fate of an empire. Yet, despite these internal squabbles, the Mongol machine kept rolling, thanks in part to the groundwork laid by Genghis. His genius for governance, establishing a legal system, a postal network, and a merit-based hierarchy, created an institutional framework that ensured the empire didn't collapse like a house of cards at the first sign of trouble. It was as if Genghis had left behind a blueprint for resilience, a testament to his understanding that an empire is only as strong as its foundations. Now, let's address the elephant in the room. The legacy of Genghis Khan isn't just a tale of conquest and administration. It's a complex tapestry woven with threads of both progress and destruction. On one hand, he ushered in an era of unprecedented connectivity, linking east and west in a web of trade and cultural exchange that would lay the groundwork for the modern world. On the other, his campaigns were nothing short of apocalyptic for many regions, leaving a trail of devastation that reshaped entire societies. In the centuries following Genghis's death, his descendants continued to expand and consolidate the empire. Kublai Khan, perhaps the most famous after Genghis himself, would go on to establish the Yuan dynasty in China, blending Mongol and Chinese traditions into a new cultural synthesis. It's like the ultimate fusion dish, unexpected, yet surprisingly cohesive. Under Kublai, the empire embraced Chinese culture, administration, and even cuisine, cementing the Mongols' reputation not just as conquerors, but as cultural chameleons. But let's not sugarcoat it. The Mongol Empire was a double-edged sword. The same roads that facilitated trade and communication also carried the dreaded Black Death, a grim reminder that connectivity can spread more than just good vibes and silk. The plague decimated populations across Eurasia, a historical footnote that underscores the dark side of globalization. It's a poignant reminder that every silver lining has its cloud. And here's a nugget for you. Genghis Khan's legacy also includes a genetic footprint that's the stuff of legends, or rather, genealogical studies. A staggering number of men in Asia, about 16 million today, or roughly 0.5% of the world's male population, are said to be direct descendants of the great Khan, a testament to his prolific progeny. It's a legacy that transcends borders, quite literally written into the DNA of countless individuals. As we wrap up this saga, let's reflect on the duality of Genghis Khan's legacy. He was a leader who could unite the disparate tribes of the Mongolian steppe into a formidable force, yet also bring entire civilizations to their knees. His empire was a marvel of organization and innovation, yet also a harbinger of destruction and change. It's this complexity that makes Genghis Khan a figure of endless fascination, a man who shaped the course of history, for better or worse. So, as you tuck yourself in tonight, ponder this. Genghis Khan didn't just build an empire, he crafted a legacy that continues to echo through the ages. It's a story of resilience and ruthlessness, vision and violence, innovation and upheaval. And while the shadows of his conquests still loom large, it's the light of his innovations that truly illuminate his place in history. Sweet dreams, and remember, history is more than dates and battles. It's the story of us all. If Urbino in 1483 had a tourism brochure, it would probably read something like, "Come for the frescoes, stay because you have no choice." Nestled in the Italian hills, this town was less of a bustling metropolis and more of a Renaissance artist factory. And from the moment little Raffaello Sanzio popped into existence, he was destined to wield a paintbrush like a Renaissance rock star. Raphael's father, Giovanni Santi, was a court painter, which back then was akin to being the guy with the garage band that actually got a few gigs. Giovanni didn't just paint pretty pictures, he crafted the artistic air his son would breathe. Ironically, Giovanni's own work never quite reached the fame of his son's future oeuvre, but hey, someone had to set the stage. Urbino was a place where art wasn't just appreciated, it was a currency, a way to climb the social ladder. Think of it as a medieval LinkedIn profile, minus the annoying endorsements. In a world where you were either painting masterpieces or painting the kitchen, Raphael's career path was pretty much set in stone, or fresco, if you will. By the time he was a teenager, Raphael was already showing signs of his future genius. But let's be honest, his early work was more paint by numbers than Sistine Chapel. Yet even these early pieces managed to catch the eye of some influential patrons. Talk about being the teacher's pet of the art world. Speaking of patrons, Renaissance Italy was a bit like a modern-day reality TV show where artists competed for the favor of wealthy sponsors. If Raphael had a tagline, it might have been, "We'll paint for patronage." And paint he did. His ability to charm patrons was as legendary as his brushwork, perhaps because being an artist back then was a bit like being a celebrity chef today. You had to have the talent, the charisma, and the ability to whip up something that made the Medici family go, wow. But hold the applause. There were no Michelin stars back then, just the hope of securing your next commission. In this competitive environment, Raphael had to navigate a world where social dynamics were as complex as one of his compositions. The artists of the Renaissance were revered, but they were also expected to churn out work that kept their patrons happy. Imagine being in a constant state of auditioning for your next meal ticket. It's no wonder the myth of the tortured artist has persisted. Raphael, though, was the exception. His charm and skill meant he was less tortured genius, more the savvy entrepreneur of his time. Now, let's talk numbers. Raphael was born in 1483, and by the age of 11, he was already helping in his father's workshop. By 1500, at the tender age of 17, he was considered a master painter. That's like graduating from art school before you've even finished your first round of teenage angst. It's also a testament to the high stakes and rapid pace of Renaissance art careers. This was a time when the average life expectancy hovered around 35 years. No pressure, right? Despite his early success, Raphael wasn't some solitary genius laboring away in obscurity. He was a social creature who knew how to network, a skill that often gets overlooked when discussing his artistic prowess. Networking in Renaissance, Italy wasn't just about schmoozing at the local tavern. It involved traveling, making connections, and even a bit of flattery. Raphael's charm wasn't just an asset, it was a necessity. In a world where your livelihood depended on the whims of the wealthy, a little charm could go a long way. And here's where we bust a few myths. The romantic image of the solitary artist, slaving away in a dimly lit studio, is more fairy tale than fact. Raphael's world was bustling with creativity and collaboration. He learned from the best, and his father's workshop was the perfect training ground. Giovanni Santi may not have achieved the fame of a Michelangelo or a Leonardo, but he provided Raphael with an invaluable education in both art and the art of survival. Raphael's early works may not have screamed genius at first glance, but they hinted at what was to come. His compositions were balanced, his colors vibrant, and even as a teenager, he had an uncanny ability to capture the human spirit. It was this talent that caught the attention of patrons who were eager to invest in the next big thing. Imagine being in your teens and already having a reputation that stretches beyond your hometown. For Raphael was the beginning of a journey that would take him far beyond the borders of Urbino. In the end, Raphael's early life was a perfect storm of talent, opportunity, and the right connections. He was like the Renaissance version of a prodigy tech startup, and his investors were the patrons who recognized his potential. But let's not sugarcoat it. Being an artist in 15th century Italy was no easy ride. It required skill, determination, and a willingness to play the game. Raphael was a master of all three, and his journey was just beginning. So, Raphael's journey was just beginning, and like any classic tale of ambition, his next move was crucial. Cue the dramatic entrance to Florence in 1504. Imagine walking into a city that's not just the cradle of the Renaissance, but a gladiator arena for artists. Florence was less wish upon a star, and more compete with the giants. This was where the titans of art, Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo, were already flexing their creative muscles. If Florence were a Facebook group, it'd be called Artists Who Make You Question Your Life Choices. Raphael, however, was no starry-eyed fanboy. He was here to learn, to observe, and yes, to network like his life depended on it, because it kind of did. Florence was the Silicon Valley of the art world. It was all about innovation, connections, and a bit of healthy rivalry. Raphael wasn't just crashing the party. He was there to steal the show, but with the charm of a Renaissance George Clooney. Now, let's talk about this rivalry. Imagine a reality show where the contestants are artistic legends and the prize is eternal fame. The atmosphere between Raphael, Michelangelo, and Leonardo was like a never-ending episode of Project Runway, minus the Tim Gunn pep talks. Michelangelo was the moody genius, known for his intense focus and equally intense brooding. He was best known for his sculpture, the David, which, by the way, stood at a colossal 17 feet. Talk about overcompensating. Leonardo, on the other hand, was the Renaissance man incarnate, painter, scientist, inventor. If multitasking were a sport, he'd have all the trophies. Raphael, the newcomer, had to find his niche in this high-stakes environment. He watched, he learned, and he adapted. It was less about competition and more about strategic imitation. He absorbed Leonardo's esfumado technique like a sponge, achieving that soft, smoky transition between colors. Meanwhile, Michelangelo's dynamic figures inspired Raphael's approach to form and movement. It was like learning to cook from Gordon Ramsay and then heading over to Jamie Oliver for a few tips on presentation. But don't let the myth fool you. These weren't amicable art workshops. Stories of their rivalry are legendary, and while some are exaggerated, there's a grain of truth. Michelangelo was famously irked by Raphael's success and the younger artist's ability to charm patrons effortlessly. You could say Raphael was the Renaissance's favorite freelancer. He had the uncanny ability to make patrons feel like they were the most important people in the world, even if they were just one of many. And speaking of patrons, let's dive into the economics of art in Florence. A well-placed fresco or portrait could earn an artist more than the cost of a small villa. Imagine your painting being the Renaissance equivalent of a Bitcoin investment. The Medici family, Florence's power brokers, were the art world's venture capitalists, funding artists who they believed could enhance their legacy. In this context, Raphael's ability to network wasn't just a social skill, it was a survival mechanism. Raphael's works during his Florence years, such as the Madonna of the Goldfinch or the Entombment, were more than just pretty pictures. They were his resume. Each piece was a testament to his evolving style and his understanding of human emotion. His Madonna paintings, in particular, became his trademark, combining divine serenity with a touch of humanity that appealed to both the devout and the discerning eye of his patrons. But let's not romanticize it too much. Being an artist in Renaissance Florence was a hustle. Raphael may have had a knack for schmoozing, but he also had to deal with the whims of wealthy patrons who could make or break a career. It was a delicate balancing act between creative expression and customer satisfaction. Imagine having to paint a masterpiece while your client stands over your shoulder, offering unsolicited advice. Not exactly the picture of artistic freedom. Yet, Raphael's time in Florence was a masterclass in more than just brushwork. It was here that he honed his skills in diplomacy and adaptability. His ability to navigate the fraught dynamics of the Florentine art scene was as crucial to his success as his talent. By 1508, he had caught the attention of Pope Julius Roman II, who summoned him to Rome. But let's not jump ahead. There's still plenty to unpack in Florence. In the end, Raphael's stint in Florence was about more than rivalry or artistic technique. It was a testament to his ability to thrive under pressure. He was the Renaissance equivalent of a startup founder, pivoting his strategy while keeping an eye on the competition. His time in Florence wasn't just a chapter in his career. It was the crucible that forged him into one of history's greatest artists. And while the rivalry with Michelangelo and Leonardo makes for a juicy narrative, it's Raphael's talent and tenacity that truly set him apart. Raphael left Florence with more than just skills. He left with a network, a reputation, and a portfolio that would open doors across Italy. The stage was set for his Roman adventure, where the stakes would be even higher and the rewards potentially greater. But that's a story for another day. Stay tuned as Raphael takes on Rome, where the canvas is bigger, the patrons more demanding, and the competition fiercer than ever. As Raphael packed his brushes and bid farewell to Florence, he wasn't just leaving behind a city steeped in artistic prowess. He was stepping onto the grandest stage of them all, Rome. In 1508, Pope Julius Roman II, the original Renaissance art critic, had called upon Raphael to bring some artistic pizzazz to the Vatican. Imagine being summoned by arguably the most powerful man in Christendom to redecorate his office. It's like getting a call from Spielberg to direct the next blockbuster. Welcome to Rome, where the stakes were higher than the Sistine Chapel's dome. Pope Julius Roman II, known as the Warrior Pope, a title that sounds like it was plucked straight from a medieval action figure collection, wasn't just interested in spiritual matters. He was a patron of the arts, and by patron, I mean he was the Renaissance equivalent of a Hollywood producer with a keen eye for talent. He wanted the Vatican to be the envy of every kingdom, and what better way to do that than with a little artistic flair? Raphael's mission, should he choose to accept it, and let's face it, he did, was to transform the Vatican into a visual feast. His first big project, the Stanza della Signatura, a room that would become a canvas for his genius. Think of it as the original man cave, but with fewer sports memorabilia and more philosophical debates. Raphael painted a series of frescoes here, including the iconic School of Athens, which turned the room into a who's who of ancient philosophers, complete with Plato and Aristotle having a friendly academic showdown. Now, let's talk logistics. Creating these massive artworks wasn't as simple as unrolling a canvas and getting to work. We're talking about frescoes here, artworks painted on freshly laid wet plaster. The method required precise timing and a steady hand, not to mention a tolerance for the Roman heat that could turn anyone into a human puddle. Raphael needed a team, an art factory, if you will, to keep the creativity flowing and the plaster from drying too soon. This is where Raphael's other genius came into play, management skills. His workshop was a Renaissance version of a startup, only instead of coding apps, his team was busy mixing pigments and perfecting brushstrokes. Raphael's assistants were more than mere apprentices. They were crucial to his operation. Under his guidance, they became an assembly line of artistry, each with a role in bringing his grand visions to life. It was less lone genius and more creative commune. And here's the kicker. Raphael wasn't just a great artist. He was a genuinely nice guy. In an era when temperamental genius was practically a job requirement, Raphael's charm set him apart. His contemporaries were often plagued by mood swings and rivalries that could give any soap opera a run for its money. But Raphael, he was the Renaissance's mister. Congeniality, making friends and allies in a world where enemies were a dime a dozen. But let's not sugarcoat it too much. Raphael's charm wasn't just about winning popularity contests. It was a strategic tool in his arsenal. Being nice got him places, literally. It opened doors, secured commissions, and kept patrons happy. In a cutthroat industry where artists could be as disposable as yesterday's news, Raphael's ability to maintain relationships was as important as his ability to paint a mean Madonna. Now, let's turn our gaze to the Sistine Chapel tapestries. While Michelangelo was busy painting the ceiling, Raphael was tasked with another major project, designing a series of tapestries to adorn the chapel's walls. These artworks were essentially the Renaissance's version of a Netflix original series, each panel telling a story that captivated onlookers with its drama and detail. They were woven in Brussels, which was the tapestry capital of the world, and cost a fortune, around 500 ducats each, a sum that could buy you a swanky Roman villa. These tapestries depicted scenes from the Acts of the Apostles, bringing the biblical tales to life with a vibrancy that was unmatched. But here's the twist. While Raphael designed them, he didn't actually weave them. That job fell to skilled artisans in Brussels. The tapestries were like a blockbuster movie where Raphael was the director, but the craftsmen were the special effects wizards who made it all happen. The logistics of this operation were nothing short of a Renaissance road trip. Raphael's designs had to be shipped to Belgium, where they were transformed into textile masterpieces before being sent back to Rome. It was a logistical feat that required coordination, patience, and probably a few strong ales to cope with the stress. Yet, the end result was worth every ounce of effort. Tapestries that dazzled the Vatican's visitors and solidified Raphael's reputation as a master of monumental art. In the competitive arena that was Renaissance Rome, Raphael didn't just survive, he thrived. His ability to juggle massive projects, manage a team, and charm the socks off patrons made him a force to be reckoned with. It wasn't just about putting paint to plaster. It was about building a legacy that would outlast the whims of popes and the fads of the day. Raphael's time in Rome was a masterclass in artistic ambition, a testament to what could be achieved with talent, tenacity, and a touch of diplomacy. And so, as Raphael continued to paint and design, his reputation grew, reaching heights that few artists could dream of. But the story doesn't end here. There were more challenges ahead, more masterpieces to create, and of course, more myths to debunk. Stay tuned as Raphael's journey in Rome unfolds, revealing a world where the canvas was vast, the stakes high, and the art nothing short of revolutionary. As Raphael's reputation soared in Rome, he found himself at the epicenter of artistic ambition, where the stakes were as high as the Vatican's towering ambitions. The papal commissions kept rolling in, solidifying his status as the Renaissance's artistic golden boy. But let's not pretend this was all smooth sailing. Raphael's rise to fame wasn't without its backstage antics and colorful escapades. First up, let's dive into his love life, which could rival any modern-day celebrity gossip column. Raphael was quite the Renaissance heartthrob, and his affairs were as vivid as his color palette. Enter La Fornarina, a baker's daughter who allegedly captured his heart and inspired some of his most intimate portraits. While the details of their relationship remain shrouded in mystery, it's safe to say Raphael's romantic entanglements provided ample fodder for the grapevine of the day. Imagine the 16th century equivalent of paparazzi whispering about the charming painter and his muse. It's practically a Netflix series waiting to happen. But Raphael's personal life wasn't just about romantic escapades. He was also juggling a work schedule that would make any modern-day workaholic blush. The myth of Raphael as the eternally young, carefree artist is romantic, sure, but the reality was far less glamorous. Behind the scenes, he was a relentless workhorse, churning out commissions with the precision of a Renaissance assembly line. If there were a Fitbit for productivity, Raphael's would have been off the charts. The political dynamics of the Vatican at this time were as complex as one of Raphael's compositions. Pope Julius Roman II, with his grand visions for the Vatican, was not just a casual art enthusiast. He was a strategic player in the political chess game of Europe. Art wasn't just about beauty. It was a tool for diplomacy and power. Raphael's frescoes and tapestries weren't merely decorative. They were messages, carefully curated to convey the intellectual and spiritual supremacy of the Church. Imagine using your Instagram feed as a way to assert your dominance over global politics. That's the Vatican's art strategy in a nutshell. Raphael's School of Athens, for instance, was more than just a who's who of ancient philosophers. It was a visual manifesto, showcasing the Church's role as the custodian of both spiritual and intellectual wisdom. And while we're debunking myths, let's talk about Raphael's so-called rivalry with Michelangelo. Sure, there was tension. Michelangelo was famously grumpy about Raphael's rising star, but it's not like they were throwing paintbrushes at each other in the Sistine Chapel. The real competition was in the subtext, in the way each artist's work tried to outdo the others in capturing the essence of human divinity. Meanwhile, Raphael's charm and ability to navigate these political waters were as crucial as his artistic skills. His knack for diplomacy meant he was more than just an artist. He was a trusted advisor, a confidant to the power players of the Vatican. Raphael knew that his art had to speak not only to the eyes, but also to the ambitions of those who commissioned it. This was art as a power play, each fresco a carefully crafted move in the game of influence. And let's not forget the economic realities. Raphael wasn't painting for mere pocket change. Commissions from the Vatican were the Renaissance equivalent of landing a top-dollar Hollywood contract. We're talking about sums that could bankroll an entire workshop of assistants, not to mention fund the occasional indulgent lifestyle choice. Raphael's ability to manage these finances and keep his operation running smoothly was as impressive as his brushwork. Yet, despite the glamour and the gossip, Raphael remained grounded in his pursuit of artistic excellence. His work ethic was legendary, sometimes to the point of self-destruction. The romanticized image of Raphael as the youthful artist belies the grueling reality of his workload, which ultimately took a toll on his health. In a way, Raphael was the original burnout case, a cautionary tale of what happens when passion meets relentless pressure. As Raphael's fame reached its zenith, so did the complexity of his commissions. The Vatican was not just a client, it was a demanding taskmaster, expecting nothing short of masterpieces that would withstand the scrutiny of history. Each project was a high-wire act, balancing artistic innovation with the expectations of his powerful patrons. Raphael's ability to deliver time and again was nothing short of miraculous, a testament to his unparalleled skill and determination. So, as we peel back the layers of Raphael's life in Rome, we see a portrait of an artist who was as much a diplomat as he was a genius. His art was a tool, wielded deftly to navigate the intricate web of politics and power that defined his era. It's a story of ambition, love, and the relentless pursuit of beauty, all set against the backdrop of a city where every brushstroke could change the course of history. And while the myth of Raphael as the eternally young, carefree artist is alluring, the reality is far more compelling. It's a story of a man who, despite the pressures and the politics, managed to create works that transcended time. As we continue to explore Raphael's journey, there's much more to uncover, more drama, more masterpieces, and of course, more myths to debunk. Stay tuned, because the saga of Raphael is far from over, and the next chapter promises to be just as captivating as the last. But as with any captivating tale, the curtain eventually falls, and for Raphael, it fell all too soon. In 1520, on Good Friday no less, Raphael shuffled off this mortal coil at the tender age of 37, leaving behind enough artistic masterpieces to make your average museum curator drool. His death marked the end of an era, and boy, did it kick off a whirlwind of posthumous myth-making that would put any modern tabloid to shame. First, let's dive into the juicy details, or lack thereof. The official narrative is that Raphael died of a fever after a night of what can only be described as vigorous socializing. Of course, the rumor mill, fueled by the ever-fanciful Giorgio Vasari, suggested that Raphael's demise was the result of excessive romantic escapades, hinting that he might have been the original work hard, play harder poster child. While it's a tantalizing story, it's probably more fiction than fact. It's far more likely that Raphael fell victim to the common ailments of his time, when medical knowledge was about as sophisticated as a game of medieval charades. Yet, the idea of the artist burning out through excess is a seductive narrative that has persisted through the ages. It's the classic cautionary tale of genius snuffed out prematurely, a storyline with just enough spice to keep it alive in cultural memory. But let's be clear. Raphael's death was tragic, not just because he was young, but because he was at the peak of his creative powers, a Renaissance powerhouse whose potential was only just being realized. Now, onto the legacy. Raphael left behind a body of work that shaped the trajectory of Western art like a celestial GPS. His influence was as pervasive as it was profound, setting the gold standard for composition, balance, and beauty. His frescoes in the Vatican, such as the School of Athens, remain iconic, not just because they are aesthetically pleasing, but because they encapsulate the intellectual spirit of the Renaissance, a time when art and science were less about division and more about harmony. And then there's what Raphael did to the concept of the artist. Before him, artists were often seen as mere craftsmen, skilled laborers who painted by commission. But Raphael, with his charm and intellect, elevated the status of the artist to that of a cultural icon. He was a Renaissance influencer. His brushstroke was his hashtag, and his patrons were his followers. His ability to mingle with the upper echelons of society while producing art that spoke to both the heart and intellect set a precedent that artists like Rubens and Titian would follow. But let's not gloss over the economic realities. Raphael was an entrepreneur in his own right. His workshop was more than just a creative hub. It was a business empire. He understood that art wasn't just about passion, it was about profit. His ability to manage finances, commissions, and a team of assistants was as masterful as his artwork. Raphael was the Steve Jobs of the Renaissance, minus the turtleneck, but with all the visionary flair. As time marched on, Raphael's work continued to influence generations of artists. His techniques were studied, emulated, and sometimes outright copied by those who followed. The Baroque period, with its dramatic flair and emotional intensity, owes a debt to Raphael's ability to capture the human spirit in paint. Even the neoclassicists, with their love for order and symmetry, found inspiration in his compositions. Raphael's art was like a well-aged wine, improving with time and leaving an indelible mark on those who tasted it. But what is it about Raphael that continues to resonate today? Why is it that, in a world of digital art and virtual reality, his paintings still draw crowds and command astronomical auction prices? The answer lies in his ability to capture the essence of humanity. Raphael's art speaks to the universal truths of beauty, emotion, and intellect. His work transcends the canvas, inviting viewers to engage not just with the art, but with the ideas and ideals it represents. It's the kind of storytelling that never goes out of style. And then there's the myth-making, the stories of Raphael's charm, his romantic dalliances, and his untimely death. These tales add a layer of intrigue that keeps us talking, debating, and myth-busting centuries later. It's a reminder that while we may love to romanticize the past, the reality is often a tangled web of human ambition, creativity, and the occasional scandal. As we wrap up our journey through Raphael's life and legacy, it's clear that his story is more than just a tale of artistic genius. It's a narrative rich with lessons on ambition, the power of charm, and the relentless pursuit of beauty. Raphael's art continues to resonate not because of the myths that surround him, but because of the undeniable truth that, in every brushstroke, he captured something quintessentially human. In the end, Raphael's legacy is a testament to the enduring power of art to transcend time and touch the soul. His work reminds us that while the world may change, the pursuit of beauty and the exploration of the human condition remain as relevant today as they were in the halls of the Vatican. So the next time you find yourself gazing at a Raphael masterpiece, take a moment to appreciate not just the art, but the remarkable story of the man behind it, a story of genius, ambition, and the timeless allure of the human spirit. Italy in the 14th century was like a teenager on the brink of a major glow-up. And trust me, it wasn't just about the art and fancy architecture. At the heart of this transformation was a little thing called the Renaissance, and its roots are deeply tangled in the economic realities of the time. Now, you might be thinking, economics, really? But stick with me, because the story of how Italy went from medieval meh to Renaissance fabulous is a compelling mix of money, eggs, and the kind of family drama that would make a soap opera look dull. Let's start with the Medici family, the rock stars of Renaissance finance. They weren't just any old banking family. They were the ultimate power brokers in Florence. Picture the Medicis as the godfathers of the financial world, minus the cement shoes, with Cosimo de' Medici leading the charge. By 1434, he had more influence than a modern-day social media mogul, and it's no exaggeration to say that he was the bank behind the art. The Medici Bank had branches stretching from London to Constantinople, and at their height, they were the financial equivalent of a Renaissance Starbucks, everywhere and incredibly influential. But how did they get so loaded in the first place? Well, it turns out that medieval banking wasn't all about sitting around counting coins, Scrooge McDuck style. The Medici Bank was innovative, introducing something akin to our present-day letters of credit, which made trade a lot smoother. They even managed to get in good with the Pope, which, back then, was like having the Vatican on speed dial. This gave them access to the lucrative papal accounts, effectively turning Florence into an economic powerhouse. However, the Renaissance wasn't just a product of shrewd banking. The Black Death also played a surprisingly crucial role in setting the stage. Yeah, the plague, talk about a plot twist. In a grim twist of fate, this catastrophic event actually boosted the economy. The Black Death wiped out about 30–60% of Europe's population, including a hefty chunk of Italy's, which meant fewer mouths to feed, but also fewer hands to work. This scarcity of labor led to higher wages for those who survived. Suddenly, the average worker had more cash to splash, and what better way to spend it than on art and culture? Florence, Venice, and Milan became cultural meccas, where money was flowing faster than the Arno River during a flood. Money, of course, is like manure. It's not worth a thing unless it's spread around, and spread it did. This newfound wealth meant that cities could afford to commission artists, architects, and all manner of artisans to create works that would elevate their status. And let's be honest, their ego. It was a win-win. Artists got paid, and patrons got bragging rights. Yet, let's not pretend it was all sunshine and Da Vinci sketches. The Renaissance also had its share of myths that need a good debunking. For starters, the idea that the Renaissance was a sudden explosion of culture and intellect is a bit of an oversell. In reality, it was more of a steady simmer rather than a rapid boil. Ideas and innovations didn't just pop into existence overnight. They were the result of centuries of accumulated knowledge, much of it borrowed from the Islamic world and ancient texts that were being rediscovered and translated. Furthermore, the romantic notion of the Renaissance man, someone who could paint a masterpiece in the morning and dissect a cadaver in the afternoon, is largely a myth. While figures like Leonardo da Vinci certainly existed, they were the exception, not the rule. The average Florentine was likely more concerned with the price of bread than the intricacies of humanism. Speaking of which, let's give humanism a quick nod. This intellectual movement was all about going back to the classics, but with a twist. It emphasized the potential for human achievement and individualism, which was a nice change of pace from the medieval focus on divine intervention. Renaissance humanists dug through dusty scrolls and texts like they were binge-watching a series, unearthing gems from Aristotle, Plato, and other ancient thinkers. This shift in thinking was crucial because it laid the groundwork for the scientific revolution that would follow. Despite the economic boom and cultural flowering, the Renaissance wasn't exactly a time of universal enlightenment. Social hierarchies remained rigid, and while the wealthy basked in their frescoed halls, the poor still struggled to make ends meet. It was a time of great disparity, where the gap between the haves and have-nots was as wide as the Grand Canal. So, what's the takeaway from this tangled web of money, power, and art? The Renaissance wasn't just a period of pretty pictures and philosophical musings. It was an economic and cultural revolution driven by some seriously complex factors, from the strategic moves of the Medici family to the unintended consequences of a devastating plague. It's a story that reminds us that history is rarely straightforward. And as the Renaissance dawned, it set Europe on a course that would eventually lead to the modern world, proving once again that sometimes a little chaos is just what you need to spark greatness. And speaking of chaos sparking greatness, let's dive into the Renaissance rock stars themselves, Leonardo da Vinci and Galileo Galilei. These guys weren't just doodling in the margins. They were reshaping the very way people thought about art and science. Da Vinci, for example, was like the ultimate multitasker, juggling more projects than a Silicon Valley startup. Born in 1452, he was the illegitimate son of a notary and a peasant woman, which in today's terms might have given him the kind of outsider edge that big tech CEOs brag about on their LinkedIn profiles. But let's be real, Leonardo's genius didn't spring fully formed from the Renaissance ether. This guy put in the hours. He apprenticed under Andrea del Verrocchio in Florence, where he learned everything from painting to sculpting to engineering. Imagine a Hogwarts for budding artists, minus the magic wands, and with way more marble dust. Leonardo's talent quickly outshone his masters, and legend has it that Verrocchio gave up painting after seeing Leonardo's angel in one of his own works. Talk about a mic drop moment. Of course, Leonardo's masterpieces didn't come cheap. The Mona Lisa, which took him about 4 years to complete, was commissioned by Francesco del Giocondo, a Florentine merchant who probably didn't expect his wife's portrait to become the most famous smirk in history. The painting was never even delivered to Giocondo, as Leonardo kept tweaking it, obsessed with perfecting the subtle play of light and shadow known as esfumado. Obsession, thy name is Leonardo. And then there's the matter of patronage. The Renaissance wasn't exactly a free-for-all of artistic expression. It was more like a high-stakes game of musical chairs. Artists needed patrons like the Medici family or Ludovico Sforza, the Duke of Milan, to bankroll their creative endeavors. These patrons weren't just benevolent art lovers. They were shrewd investors seeking political clout. Commissioning a fresco or a statue wasn't just about beautifying a space. It was about cementing one's legacy and power. So, when Leonardo painted the Last Supper in the refectory of Santa Maria del Grazie, it was as much about Sforza's ego as it was about artistic innovation. Now, Leonardo may have been the darling of the art world, but he had his rivals. Enter Michelangelo, a sculptor with a chip on his shoulder the size of David's marble toe. Michelangelo and Leonardo were like the Cani and Drake of their day, each convinced of his own genius, each occasionally throwing shade at the other. When Michelangelo unveiled his David in 1504, it was a statement piece, not just a statue. Standing over 17 feet tall and weighing in at more than 12,000 pounds, David was a marvel of engineering as much as art. Carved from a single block of Carrara marble, it was a testament to Michelangelo's skill and a not-so-subtle dig at Leonardo's penchant for leaving works unfinished. But let's switch gears to the realm of science, where Galileo Galilei was busy turning the universe upside down. Born in 1564 in Pisa, Galileo was the kind of guy who'd be the life of the party at a nerd convention. He didn't invent the telescope, but he was the one who pointed it at the heavens and dared to say, hey, maybe we're not the center of the universe after all. Crazy talk, right? Well, it was enough to get him into hot water with the Catholic Church, which had a vested interest in keeping Earth at the cosmic VIP table. Galileo's discoveries were game changers. His observations of Jupiter's moons in 1610 provided concrete evidence that not everything orbited the Earth, a revelation that made the Church's geocentric model look as outdated as a blockbuster rental. But Galileo didn't stop there. He championed the Copernican model, which posited that the Earth revolved around the Sun. This heliocentric view was seen as heretical by the Church, which placed Galileo under house arrest in 1633. Talk about a rough Yelp review for challenging the status quo. The Renaissance was a time when art and science were two sides of the same coin, each feeding into the other in a symbiotic relationship of creativity and discovery. Yet, it's important to note that these luminaries didn't operate in a vacuum. They were part of a larger tapestry of innovation, driven by fierce competition, intense patronage, and the occasional scandal. Leonardo, for all his genius, left a trail of unfinished projects and unfulfilled promises. Michelangelo's ego was as monumental as his sculptures, and Galileo's defiance of religious dogma came at a personal cost. This human side of the Renaissance, with all its flaws and foibles, is what makes it so endlessly fascinating. It's a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge and beauty is often a messy, complicated affair, fraught with personal vendettas and political intrigue. And while the myth of the solitary genius is alluring, the reality is far more interesting. It's a story of collaboration, competition, and a relentless drive to question the world around us. So, as we continue to explore the Renaissance, let's keep in mind that behind every masterpiece and every scientific breakthrough, there's a story of human ambition, rivalry, and the occasional scandalous twist. And isn't that what makes history so irresistibly captivating? As we turn our gaze from the intellectual fireworks of the Renaissance's art and science to its political landscape, prepare for a dose of reality that hits harder than an unexpected plot twist in your favorite binge-worthy series. While the Renaissance is often romanticized as an era of peace, enlightenment, and cultural flourishing, the truth is it was more of a Game of Thrones episode than a tranquil garden party. The Italian city-states, those glittering gems of the Renaissance, were less about Cumbaya moments and more about cutthroat politics and Machiavellian maneuvering. Let's start our tour in Florence, the city that was as much a hub of intrigue as it was a cradle of creativity. Sure, the Medici family were the patrons of the arts, but they were also the original puppet masters, pulling strings behind the scenes with the finesse of a seasoned Vegas magician. The Medici didn't simply run a bank, they ran a city. Cosimo de' Medici, often called Peder Patrii, or Father of the Fatherland, didn't earn that title by handing out roses. He played the political game with all the subtlety of a chess grandmaster, using his wealth to control the Florentine Republic like a conductor leading an orchestra. Florence in the 15th century was a republic in name, but an oligarchy in practice. The city's government was ostensibly run by a council of guilds, but in reality it was dominated by a few powerful families, with the Medici at the helm. Their influence was everywhere, like glitter, only less fun to clean up. They controlled not just the economy, but also the political appointments and alliances that kept the city's delicate balance of power intact. Yet, for all their power, the Medici had to navigate a minefield of rival families like the Albizzi and the Pazzi, who were always plotting, always scheming. The infamous Pazzi conspiracy of 1478, where an attempt was made to assassinate Lorenzo de' Medici during Easter Mass, wasn't just a blip on the radar. It was a full-on scandal that rocked Florence to its core and resulted in a brutal crackdown. Now, let's take a gondola ride over to Venice, where the waters ran deep with intrigue. The Venetian Republic was the epitome of a mercantile state, its strength built on trade routes that stretched from the Byzantine Empire to the shores of the Indian Ocean. The Venetians were the original globetrotters, and their city was like a Renaissance Dubai, with wealth flowing in on currents of spice and silk. But Venice's political structure was as complex as its canals. The Doge, elected for life, was the city's figurehead, but real power lay with the Great Council and the Council of Ten, an elite group that operated with the secrecy of a spy agency and the ruthlessness of a boardroom coup. While Venice projected an image of stability, it was no stranger to political machinations. The city was a master of espionage and diplomacy, often playing its enemies against one another to maintain its independence. It was a delicate juggling act, balancing the ambitions of the papacy, the Holy Roman Empire, and the Ottomans, all while ensuring that the trade routes remained open and profitable. And when diplomacy failed, Venice wasn't above using its formidable navy to enforce its will, as seen in the War of Chioggia against Genoa in the late 14th century, a conflict that nearly brought Venice to its knees but ultimately solidified its naval supremacy. The political landscape of the Renaissance was further complicated by the Papal States, where religion and politics were as intertwined as spaghetti and marinara. The popes of this era were less about spiritual guidance and more about territorial expansion, wielding power with a mix of divine right and very earthly ambitions. Take Pope Alexander VI, born Rodrigo Borgia, who turned nepotism into an art form. His reign was marked by scandal and excess, from lavish banquets to blatant corruption. The Borgia family's reputation for poisoning rivals was so infamous it would make a modern-day PR disaster look like a minor blip. Yet, for all this cloak and dagger drama, the Renaissance was a time of unprecedented political experimentation. The city-states, with their diverse forms of government, were like a Renaissance petri dish of political theory. Florence's republic, Venice's oligarchy, and Milan's duchy each provided a different model of governance, a fact not lost on thinkers like Niccolo Machiavelli, whose seminal work, *The Prince*, was less about princely virtues and more of a survival guide for rulers navigating the treacherous waters of power. Machiavelli's advice, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both," was not just theoretical. It was a reflection of the brutal realities of the time. And if you think the Renaissance was all about enlightenment, think again. This was an era where violence was as common as frescoes, and power was often solidified through conflict. The Italian Wars, which raged intermittently from 1494 to 1559, saw the major European powers, France, Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, squabbling over the rich spoils of Italy like kids fighting over the last slice of pizza. This series of wars turned the Italian peninsula into a battleground, with shifting alliances and betrayals that would make a soap opera look predictable. The sack of Rome in 1527 by the troops of Charles V, Holy Roman Emperor, was a grim reminder that the Renaissance's cultural achievements were forged in a crucible of conflict. Yet, in this tumultuous environment, innovation thrived. The constant jockeying for power meant that city-states were always looking for an edge, whether it was through the latest military technology or the most cutting-edge art. The competition fostered a climate of creativity, where the desire to outshine rivals led to an explosion of artistic and scientific achievements. It's a paradox that the very chaos that threatened to tear the Italian city-states apart also fueled their most remarkable contributions to history. So, while the Renaissance might seem like an idyllic period of art and intellect, it was as much about survival as it was about innovation. The political upheavals and power shifts were not mere background noise. They were the engine driving the era's dynamism. The city-states, with their rivalries and alliances, were the stage upon which the Renaissance drama played out, each conflict and conspiracy adding a layer of complexity to the narrative. As we continue to unravel the tangled threads of the Renaissance, remember that behind every triumph of art and thought, there were real people grappling with ambition, power, and the ever-present specter of conflict. It's a reminder that history, like life, is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry of vibrant colors, woven with threads of ambition, creativity, and yes, a little bit of chaos. So, stay tuned as we delve deeper into this fascinating era where the stakes were high and the players were all in. And now, as we pivot from the power plays of the Italian city-states to the broader European stage, let's talk about how the Renaissance ideas spread faster than a cat meme on the internet. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just the allure of art and the allure of humanism that did the trick. It was the technological game-changer known as the printing press, invented by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440 in Mainz, Germany. Before Gutenberg, books were copied by hand in a process slower than a snail's afternoon stroll, making them rare and expensive, like the Renaissance version of a luxury yacht. Gutenberg's press turned the book world on its head. Suddenly, you could print multiple copies of the same text quickly and relatively cheaply, democratizing access to knowledge in a way that would make even the most jaded modern educator nod in approval. By 1500, there were more than 1,000 printing presses in Europe, churning out books on everything from religious tracts to science, politics, and of course, those juicy humanist ideals. This boom in book production meant that ideas spread with unprecedented speed. It was the Renaissance equivalent of going viral, only with more parchment and fewer cat videos. But let's not pretend this was all smooth sailing. The spread of Renaissance ideas wasn't just a harmonious cultural exchange. It was more like a rock concert, where not everyone was thrilled with the new sound. Take, for instance, the reception of these ideas in Northern Europe, where they often clashed with more traditional, deeply religious sensibilities. The Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther's 95 Theses in 1517, was both a product of and a reaction to this cultural shift. Luther's beef with the Catholic Church wasn't just theological. It was a full-on cultural critique, fueled by the newly accessible ideas that questioned established authorities. The printing press played a starring role here, turning Luther's pamphlets into bestsellers faster than you can say indulgences. This wasn't just a squabble over doctrine. It was a seismic shift that shook the foundations of European society. While some regions embraced these new ideas with open arms, others resisted, fearing the erosion of traditional values. In England, for example, Henry Roman VIII break with the Catholic Church wasn't just about his marital woes. Though, let's be honest, his divorce drama would have made juicy tabloid fodder, but also about consolidating power and embracing the new intellectual currents of the Renaissance. The English court under Elizabeth I became a hotbed of artistic and intellectual activity, with Shakespeare and his contemporaries redefining literature and theatre. Meanwhile, across the Channel in France, the Renaissance took on a distinctly Gallic flair, blending Italian influences with local traditions. The French court, under Francis I, became a beacon of cultural patronage, attracting artists like Leonardo da Vinci, who spent his final years there, probably charming the court with tales of his unfinished inventions and enigmatic smiles. French humanism, though, was less about challenging the church and more about refining it, blending classical ideals with a deep respect for religious tradition. Yet, for all the cultural blossoming, not everyone was on board with this Renaissance makeover. The Protestant Reformation wasn't the only backlash. Even within Catholic strongholds, there were those who viewed the new ideas with suspicion. The Inquisition, that infamous enforcer of orthodoxy, wasn't just a medieval curiosity. It was alive and well during the Renaissance, ensuring that any deviations from the accepted norms were met with a stern and often fiery response. Galileo's run-in with the church wasn't an isolated incident. It was part of a broader pattern of resistance to the rapidly changing intellectual landscape. And let's not forget the economic engine driving this cultural juggernaut. Trade routes, which had been expanding since the High Middle Ages, were the Renaissance's lifeline, pumping a steady stream of goods and ideas across the continent. The Hanseatic League, that medieval powerhouse of trade, was still going strong, linking northern Europe with the Mediterranean and beyond. Meanwhile, the expansion of the Ottoman Empire had opened new routes overland, bringing goods and ideas from as far afield as China and India. These trade networks didn't just move silk and spices. They were the highways for the transmission of culture, carrying Renaissance ideas far beyond their Italian birthplace. Yet this influx of new ideas and goods wasn't universally welcomed. In some regions, the blending of local traditions with foreign influences sparked tensions. In Spain, the Reconquista and the subsequent Inquisition sought to enforce religious and cultural uniformity, even as the country became a major player in the global trade network. The wealth flowing in from the New World funded a golden age of Spanish art and literature, but also fueled a rigid adherence to orthodoxy that stifled dissent and innovation. So, what's the takeaway from this continental Renaissance road trip? It's a reminder that cultural revolutions aren't just about the triumph of new ideas. They're also about the resistance they encounter. The spread of Renaissance ideas across Europe was a complex dance of acceptance, adaptation, and opposition, driven by the twin engines of technology and trade. The printing press and the trade routes were the conduits through which these ideas flowed, but the reception they received was anything but uniform. As we continue to explore this fascinating era, keep in mind that the Renaissance was as much about conflict as it was about creativity. It was a time when the old world collided with the new, with all the messiness and brilliance that such encounters entail. The spread of Renaissance ideas was a testament to the power of human curiosity and ingenuity, but also a reminder that not everyone was eager to join the cultural Renaissance rave. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into this era of artistic and intellectual ferment, where the stakes were high and the players were all in, navigating a world that was rapidly changing, whether they liked it or not. While the Renaissance might have wrapped up its cultural banquet with a flourish, the after-party stretched on for centuries, leaving a legacy as tangled and influential as a web of Renaissance intrigue. Let's dive into how this era laid the groundwork for the modern world, from the birth of capitalism to the seeds of secularism, while also acknowledging that it wasn't all Da Vinci and roses. First up, capitalism, the economic juggernaut that powers our world today. The Renaissance didn't invent capitalism, but it certainly set the stage for its grand debut. The Italian city-states, with their bustling trade routes and financial innovations, were like the Silicon Valleys of their day. Florence's Medici Bank wasn't just a family-run operation. It was an economic powerhouse, introducing financial practices that would shape markets for centuries. By the late 15th century, Florence alone boasted around 33,000 residents, with a thriving wool industry that exported to all corners of Europe. In 1439, the Medici's bank had an estimated worth of 100,000 florins, a staggering sum back then, roughly equivalent to several $1 million today. This burgeoning commerce didn't just fill the coffers of the wealthy, it shifted societal structures. As trade expanded and wealth accumulated, the rigid feudal system began to crumble like an overbaked biscotti. The merchant class, or bourgeoisie, rose to prominence, elbowing their way into the halls of power with the finesse of a Renaissance diplomat. These self-made men, and let's face it, they were mostly men, championed a new economic order, where capital and commerce trumped noble bloodlines. The ripple effects were enormous, paving the way for the market-driven societies we know today. But let's not get too enamored with this capitalist fairy tale. The rise of money-based economies wasn't exactly a smooth ride for everyone. Wealth disparity grew as fast as a Medici commission list, with the gap between the rich and poor widening like a fresco crack in need of restoration. While the wealthy basked in art and opulence, the laboring classes often faced harsh realities, a reminder that progress can be as uneven as a haphazardly cobbled street. Shifting gears to the realm of ideas, the Renaissance also sowed the seeds of secularism, a departure from the medieval mindset that placed God at the center of everything, from politics to physics. Humanism, that intellectual movement we've chatted about, was all about placing humans at the heart of the narrative. It was a refreshing change from the medieval chorus that sang only of divine glory, emphasizing instead the potential and achievements of mankind. This shift was more than just a philosophical musing. It challenged the Church's stranglehold on knowledge and power. Enter the Enlightenment, the Renaissance's brainy offspring, where reason and scientific inquiry took center stage. Thinkers like John Locke and Voltaire, inspired by the humanist ideals of their Renaissance forebears, championed reason, liberty, and the separation of church and state. The Renaissance's rediscovery of classical texts and its emphasis on critical thought were like intellectual kindling, igniting a blaze of enlightenment that would reshape societies around the globe. The scientific revolution, too, owes a tip of the hat to the Renaissance, as scholars like Copernicus and Galileo laid the groundwork for a universe where empirical evidence, not religious dogma, was the ultimate arbiter of truth. Yet, it would be naive to paint the Renaissance solely as a beacon of progress. It also had its unintended consequences, like the spread of colonialism. Fueled by new technologies and navigational advancements, Europeans set sail to explore and exploit new worlds. The age of exploration, launched in part by Renaissance curiosity and cartography, led to the colonization of vast territories, often with devastating consequences for indigenous populations. The thirst for new markets and resources was insatiable, and the moral complexities of imperial ambition were often glossed over in the rush for riches. The Renaissance might have been about enlightenment for some, but for others, it marked the beginning of centuries of subjugation. Moreover, the Renaissance's emphasis on individualism, while liberating in many ways, also fostered a culture of competition and rivalry. The fierce patronage system that fueled so much artistic and scientific innovation was also a breeding ground for jealousy and intrigue. Artists and thinkers were often at the mercy of their patrons' whims, and the pressure to outshine rivals could be as intense as a Tuscan summer sun. The myth of the solitary genius, while romantic, obscures the collaborative and occasionally cutthroat environment in which these luminaries operated. As we wrap up this journey through the Renaissance, it's clear that its legacy is as multifaceted as a Botticelli painting. It was an era of dazzling achievements and dark shadows, of progress and inequality, of enlightenment and exploitation. The Renaissance set the stage for the modern world, with all its complexities and contradictions, reminding us that history is never a simple tale of good versus evil. It's a kaleidoscope of human ambition, creativity, and folly, where the past continually shapes the present in ways both profound and unexpected. So, as you ponder the Renaissance's impact over your next cappuccino, remember that its story is a reminder of our own potential and pitfalls. It's a call to embrace the power of creativity and reason, while acknowledging the messy, often chaotic reality of human progress. And isn't that what makes history so endlessly fascinating? It's a tapestry woven with both triumph and tragedy, inviting us to learn from its threads as we spin our own. Marie Antoinette's life story begins not in the opulence of Versailles, but in the heart of Vienna, where she was born on November 2, 1755, into the Habsburg dynasty. Imagine the scene: a bustling, aristocratic household with 15 siblings, each one a pawn on the European chessboard. Her mother, Empress Maria Theresa, was the ultimate multitasker of the 18th century, ruling an empire and orchestrating her children's marriages like a maestro conducting a symphony. Marie Antoinette, the 15th child, was destined to play a pivotal role in this dynastic dance. With a childhood spent more in the gardens than the classroom, she was hardly the erudite scholar you'd expect in a future queen. Instead, she was groomed in the fine art of charm and etiquette, which, let's face it, would later become both her shield and her Achilles' heel. Fast forward to 1770, and the young Archduchess is packed off to France at the tender age of 14, a political pawn in a game of thrones that would make HBO blush. The prize: a marriage to Louis Auguste, the Dauphin of France, a match designed to cement peace between two age-old rivals. The journey from Vienna to Versailles was not just a change of scenery, it was a full-blown cultural shock. The French court was a swamp of intrigue and protocol, where every gesture was scrutinized and every word dissected. Marie Antoinette arrived with a retinue of Austrian attendants and a head full of youthful confidence, unaware that she was stepping into a world that made high school politics look like a Sunday picnic. She was officially married on May 16, 1770, in a lavish ceremony that cost a whopping 2 million livres. To put that in perspective, that's about $20 million in today's currency. Basically, a Kardashian wedding on steroids. Yet behind the grand displays, the young couple faced more than just the pressure of public expectation. Louis, awkward and reserved, was more interested in larksmithing than in his new bride, while Marie Antoinette was charming but clueless about her new role. Their personal lives became the talk of Europe, with pamphleteers and gossip mongers spinning tales of a union as cold as the marble halls of Versailles. Marie Antoinette struggled to fit into the French court, where the rule-book was thicker than a Tolstoy novel. Court life demanded a kind of social acrobatics that she was initially unprepared for. The etiquette was Byzantine, the alliances treacherous, and the court's mood as changeable as French weather. Her attempts to inject some joie de vivre into this staid environment, like introducing informal gatherings and championing the arts, were received with a mix of fascination and suspicion. Here was a young woman who preferred music and theatre to politics and diplomacy, a queen in the making who wore her emotions on her exquisitely embroidered sleeve. Cultural differences went beyond just etiquette. French aristocrats were still reeling from the Enlightenment, a period that encouraged reason and science over tradition and superstition. Meanwhile, Marie Antoinette's Austrian background was steeped in the ornate traditions of the Habsburg court. She preferred the light-hearted operas of Gluck over the more serious French dramas, a choice that seemed innocuous, but was emblematic of the larger disconnect between her and her new country. And let's not forget fashion, a realm where Marie Antoinette truly excelled. Her wardrobe, a kaleidoscope of silks and satins, became a spectacle in itself, costing the French treasury a pretty penny and earning her the less-than-flattering nickname Madame Deficit. With her extravagant lifestyle, Marie Antoinette became the poster child for all that was wrong in France. The public's first impressions were not kind. To the cash-strapped commoners, her indulgences were an affront, a reminder of their own struggles. Her penchant for gambling was another sore point. She once lost 200,000 livres in a single night, a sum that could have fed whole villages. The infamous phrase, "let them eat cake," is often attributed to her, though historians agree she probably never uttered those words. It's a catchy line, sure, but it's about as accurate as a medieval map of the world. The seeds of public discontent were sown early and often. Pamphlets circulated depicting her as a harpy sucking the lifeblood from France, emphasizing her foreign roots and supposed disdain for her adopted homeland. It didn't help that she was often seen as wielding undue influence over her indecisive husband, steering him towards decisions that served her interests, or so the rumors went. Her inability to produce an heir only fueled the fire, as gossips whispered about the royal couple's bedroom issues, a conversation no one wants to have next to the cheese platter. Yet amidst all this, Marie Antoinette was just a teenager thrust into a role she barely understood, bearing the weight of two nations on her slender shoulders. Her early years in France were a whirlwind of parties, politics, and public scrutiny, a dizzying dance between duty and desire. While history would paint her as a symbol of excess, the reality was far more complex. She was a young woman caught in the crossfire of history, a queen whose life was a tapestry of contradictions, stitched together with threads of charm, controversy, and a touch of tragedy. As the pages of history flipped from Marie Antoinette's early trials to her reign as queen, the narrative took on a decidedly more opulent hue. Enter the world of Versailles, a palace so extravagant that it made every other royal residence look like a starter home. Marie Antoinette embraced this playground of power with gusto, her lifestyle becoming the stuff of legend, or infamy, depending on who you asked. The young queen, now in her 20s, was an icon of fashion and extravagance at a time when France's coffers were as empty as a Parisian café at dawn. Let's talk numbers, shall we? In the 1780s, France was hemorrhaging money faster than you could say, let them eat brioche. The country was knee-deep in debt, thanks largely to its involvement in the American Revolution and a tax system that was about as fair as a rigged carnival game. Yet, in the halls of Versailles, none of this seemed to matter. Marie Antoinette's spending was as legendary as her hairstyles, tall, elaborate, and impossible to ignore. Her wardrobe alone cost around 120,000 livres annually, a sum that could have comfortably supported an entire village. Her jewelry collection was a magpie's dream, each piece a glittering testament to both her status and, inadvertently, the growing chasm between the monarchy and the people. But hold your powdered wigs, we're not just talking about shopping sprees. The real scandal was in the optics. Imagine a queen hosting lavish parties and gambling away small fortunes in a palace where chandeliers outnumbered practical solutions to France's fiscal woes. The Petit Trianon, a private estate within the Versailles grounds, became her personal sanctuary, a place where she could escape the rigid protocols of court life. Here, Marie Antoinette played shepherdess in silk gowns, a pastoral fantasy that was as disconnected from reality as possible. Her critics saw this not as an innocent diversion, but as evidence of her detachment from the struggles of the common folk. Ah, the myth of "let them eat cake." This infamous phrase is often attributed to Marie Antoinette, a verbal guillotine that slices through the annals of history with its sheer audacity. But spoiler alert, she likely never said it. The first mention of this phrase appeared in the writings of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, penned when Marie Antoinette was still a child. Yet, the story stuck like gum on a shoe, a reflection less of historical fact and more of public sentiment. It was a soundbite that captured the imagination because it so perfectly encapsulated the perceived aloofness of the monarchy, accurate or not. The economic strain of Marie Antoinette's expenditures wasn't just a line item in the national budget. It was a symbol of governmental mismanagement. France's economy at the time was a creaky carriage on a bumpy road, and the Queen's financial escapades were the squeaky wheel that got all the attention. Her spending habits earned her the moniker Madame Deficit, a title that didn't look great on a business card, but was perfect fodder for scathing pamphlets that circulated like wildfire. These pamphlets were the 18th century equivalent of viral tweets, and they painted Marie Antoinette as a foreign interloper squandering French resources. The political implications of her perceived extravagance were profound. Louis Roman XVI, her husband and the king, was seen as a weak ruler whose strings were pulled by his more charismatic wife. This wasn't entirely true, but perception often becomes reality. The public began to see the Queen not as a figurehead, but as a scapegoat for their grievances. The resentment simmered, boiling over into a toxic brew of revolutionary fervor that would eventually consume the monarchy itself. Despite all this, Marie Antoinette was not entirely oblivious. She did attempt reforms, albeit small ones. She supported the arts, patronized charities, and even tried to influence her husband toward more progressive policies. But her efforts were often overshadowed by her reputation, her good intentions drowned out by the clamor of public discontent. In the end, it was the image of the queen that mattered, not the substance. Her life at Versailles was a tragicomedy, a blend of opulence and oblivion that played out against a backdrop of political instability and economic despair. As we delve deeper into Marie Antoinette's story, remember that history is rarely black and white. It's a tapestry of contradictions, woven with threads of myth and reality. The Queen's downfall wasn't merely the result of her own actions, but a confluence of circumstances beyond her control. Her story is a cautionary tale, a reminder that in the Game of Thrones, perception is often more potent than truth. And as the drums of revolution grew louder, the stage was set for a dramatic climax that would change the course of history forever. But don't worry, we're not done yet. There's more intrigue and upheaval to come, so stay tuned as we continue to unravel the enigmatic tapestry of Marie Antoinette's life. As we delve deeper into Marie Antoinette's story, it's time to zoom in on the swirling political chaos that was brewing faster than a pot of French press coffee. France in the late 18th century was a cauldron of discontent, and the royal couple was stirring the pot whether they intended to or not. The monarchy was a ship taking on water, and Marie Antoinette was, unfortunately, seen as the iceberg. Let's talk about the diamond necklace affair, a scandal so juicy it would have made tabloids around the world spontaneously combust. In 1785, the tale unfolded like a soap opera. Picture this: a diamond necklace worth 2 million livres, about $14 million today, crafted for Madame du Barry, Louis Roman XV favorite. But with Louis Roman XV death, the jewelers were left with a glittering albatross around their necks. Enter a swindler named Jean de la Motte, who concocted a scheme that would implicate none other than Marie Antoinette. Jean convinced Cardinal de Rohan that the Queen desired this necklace, but couldn't negotiate directly. The Cardinal, desperate to regain favor at court, took the bait, hook, line, and sinker, signing off on a deal that was pure fiction. When the fraud unraveled, it was Marie Antoinette who faced the brunt of public outrage. Never mind that she hadn't even laid eyes on the necklace. Her reputation was already fragile, and this scandal was a wrecking ball. The diamond necklace affair was a conspiracy that didn't just tarnish her image. It reinforced the narrative of a queen out of touch with her people, indulging in excess, while the country teetered on the edge of financial ruin. It was a public relations disaster, akin to a royal family member being embroiled in a social media scandal today. The court of public opinion was unforgiving, and Marie's attempts to clear her name were about as successful as trying to stop a runaway carriage with a lace handkerchief. Meanwhile, let's not forget about King Louis Roman XVI, whose leadership style was about as dynamic as a damp baguette. While the king was not the tyrant he's sometimes painted as, he was indecisive, a trait that became painfully evident as France's political landscape crumbled. Louis was a man more suited to tinkering with larks than unraveling the complexities of governance. His relationship with Marie Antoinette was complicated, to say the least. They were partners in a dance neither had fully mastered, each trying to lead while stepping on the other's toes. Louis, for all his faults, was not the puppet some claimed, nor was Marie the puppeteer. Their marriage was less about manipulation and more about mutual missteps in a court rife with intrigue. The disconnect between the royal court and the common people was stark. While the peasants were struggling to put bread on the table, the aristocracy was dining on lavish feasts. The economic disparity was glaring, and Marie Antoinette's perceived indifference only added fuel to the revolutionary fire. France's fiscal crisis was no small matter. It was a full-blown catastrophe. The country was drowning in debt, a whopping 3 billion livres, around $70 billion today, thanks to costly wars and a tax system that burdened the poor while the rich enjoyed a free ride. The Estates General, a representative assembly that hadn't been called since 1614, was finally convened in 1789 to address the financial mess. But by then, it was too little, too late. Marie Antoinette's attempts at damage control were earnest, if not entirely effective. She supported modest reforms and charitable causes, but these efforts were often overshadowed by her lavish lifestyle and the relentless assault from an increasingly hostile press. The Queen's genuine attempts to influence her husband towards more progressive policies were drowned out by the clamour for revolution. Her life was a series of contradictions, a queen who sought to modernize the court while being vilified as the embodiment of its excesses. The storming of the Bastille on July 14, 1789, was a pivotal moment, a clarion call for change that signaled the beginning of the end for the monarchy. Yet, even as the revolution gathered momentum, Marie Antoinette remained a figure both reviled and misunderstood. She was a scapegoat in a game of political chess that was spiraling out of control, a symbol of a regime that was increasingly seen as outdated, oppressive, and most damningly, out of touch with reality. As we continue to unravel the layers of Marie Antoinette's life, remember that history is not a simple tale of heroes and villains. It's a complex tapestry woven with the threads of ambition, ignorance, and unintended consequences. Marie Antoinette's story is not just one of personal downfall, but a reflection of a society on the brink of revolution. Her life was a tragic dance between perception and reality, a cautionary tale of what happens when the gap between the rulers and the ruled becomes too vast to bridge. So, as the French Revolution loomed like a gathering storm on the horizon, the stage was set for a dramatic and tumultuous chapter in history. Marie Antoinette's fate was sealed not by her actions alone, but by a confluence of forces beyond her control. Stay tuned as we delve deeper into the chaos and upheaval that would eventually lead to the monarchy's demise, a story that continues to captivate and caution us even today. As the revolutionary tide surged forward, the French monarchy found itself treading water in a sea of discontent. The summer of 1789 marked a turning point for France, a nation that was quickly shedding its old skin like a snake in a hurry. The Bastille had fallen, and with it, the illusion of royal invulnerability. It was as if the people of France had suddenly realized they were the ones holding the power, not the powdered wigs in Versailles. Marie Antoinette, once the glittering jewel of the French court, was now a beleaguered queen facing the harsh glare of revolutionary fervor. The atmosphere was charged with the kind of tension you could cut with a guillotine, a grim foreshadowing, if ever there was one. As Paris simmered with revolutionary zeal, Marie and her family were ensconced in the Palace of Tuileries, a gilded cage that offered as much security as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. Let's talk about the royal family's capture, a moment so dramatic it could rival any season finale. On October 5, 1789, a mob of Parisian women, fed up with bread shortages and the monarchy's perceived indifference, marched to Versailles in a torrent of righteous fury. Picture thousands of determined women, armed with whatever they could find, storming the palace. Their demand was simple: bring the king and queen back to Paris, where they could be kept under a watchful eye. It was a moment of profound irony. Marie Antoinette, who had once played pastoral games at the Petit Trianon, was now at the mercy of those she had unwittingly alienated. On October 6, under the weight of public pressure and a throng of armed revolutionaries, the royal family was escorted to Paris. The journey was a spectacle of humiliation, with the once mighty monarchs paraded like reluctant celebrities on their way to a reality TV showdown. The Queen, stoic as ever, maintained her composure, a mask of dignity in the face of impending doom. The Tuileries became their new residence, a place where the walls seemed to close in a little more each day. As Marie Antoinette attempted to navigate the treacherous political waters, her every move was scrutinized, dissected, and often misinterpreted. Her efforts to influence political decisions were largely thwarted by a combination of revolutionary suspicion and her own dwindling influence. She was like a chess player trying to win a game with half the pieces missing, each move more desperate than the last. Yet, beneath the turmoil and political machinations, her role as a mother took precedence. Marie Antoinette's attempts to protect her children from the chaos outside the palace walls were acts of quiet defiance, a reminder that beneath the crown was a woman fiercely devoted to her family. Her daughter, Marie Therese, and son, Louis Charles, were her anchors in a stormy sea, and she fought to shield them from the harsh realities of a world turned upside down. But the revolutionary tide was relentless, and by June 1791, the royal family decided to make a break for it. The plan was audacious: escape to the eastern fortress town of Montmédy, where they could regroup and rally support. It was a Hail Mary pass in a game where the stakes were life and death. Disguised as commoners, the family slipped out of Paris under the cover of night, a daring escape reminiscent of a heist movie. But like any good thriller, there was a twist. They were recognized in the town of Varennes, just 30 miles shy of their destination, and brought back to Paris under arrest. The failed escape was a turning point, a nail in the coffin of royal credibility. The public's trust, already fragile, shattered completely. Marie Antoinette's reputation was in tatters, and the monarchy's days were numbered. The Queen's stoic demeanor in the face of mounting threats was a testament to her resilience, though it did little to sway public opinion. As the revolution spiraled into chaos, the royal family found themselves increasingly isolated. The political landscape was as volatile as a powder keg, and the monarchy was the lit fuse. By August 1792, the Tuileries Palace was stormed by revolutionaries, and the family was imprisoned in the Temple, a medieval fortress turned makeshift jail. Gone were the days of opulent feasts and extravagant gowns. The reality of their situation was as stark as the stone walls that now surrounded them. Marie Antoinette's trial, held in October 1793, was less about justice and more about spectacle, a show trial designed to seal her fate and placate the revolutionary masses. The charges were as outlandish as they were serious: treason, depleting the national treasury, and conspiring with enemy powers. The courtroom was a theater of the absurd, where evidence was flimsy and the verdict was a foregone conclusion. The Queen, however, faced her accusers with remarkable composure, her dignity intact despite the gravity of her situation. One of the most poignant moments came when she was accused of incest with her son, a charge so vile it elicited gasps even from her detractors. Marie Antoinette's response was a masterclass in poise and maternal instinct. "If I have not replied, it is because nature itself refuses to respond to such a charge laid against a mother," she declared, her words ringing with the clarity of truth amidst a cacophony of lies. The trial, a mere 2 days long, ended with the inevitable death sentence. Marie Antoinette, the former queen who had once lived a life of unimaginable luxury, now faced the guillotine, a symbol of revolutionary justice that loomed large in the public imagination. Her execution on October 16, 1793, was a somber affair. Clad in a simple white chemise, she rode to her death in an open cart, her once lavish world reduced to a few stark realities. It was a tragic irony for a woman who had once embodied the excesses of the French court, a fall from grace that was both inevitable and profoundly moving. As we leave Marie Antoinette at this critical juncture, remember that her story is not just a tale of personal downfall. It's a reflection of a society in upheaval, a cautionary tale about the dangers of excess and the power of public perception. Her life, marked by contradictions and controversy, serves as a reminder that history is as much about the stories we tell as it is about the facts we remember. And while her chapter may be closing, the narrative of the revolution is far from over. Stay tuned as we dive deeper into the tumultuous aftermath of a monarchy's demise and the birth of a new era in France. The blade fell on October 16, 1793, marking not just the end of Marie Antoinette's life, but the symbolic execution of an era. As the tumbril carried her through the streets of Paris, the former queen was met with a cacophony of jeers and cheers, a public spectacle that was part revolutionary fervor, part bloodthirsty entertainment. Her execution was a grim theater, staged to purge the old regime and herald a new order. But let's be real. Even without her head, Marie Antoinette's legacy was far from dead. Her death was the culmination of a revolution that had been brewing like a strong French roast. But her story didn't end at the scaffold. The real question is, what did her downfall mean for France? Well, Marie Antoinette's execution was more than just a personal tragedy or a royal decapitation. It was a seismic shift in the power dynamics of France. Here was a queen who had become the scapegoat for a nation's woes, a woman whose life was as much about perception as it was about reality. Her execution was meant to signal the end of monarchical excess, a way for the revolutionaries to say, "We're done with the old ways." But did it really work out that way? Not exactly. In the broader scheme of things, Marie Antoinette's demise did little to solve France's problems. The revolutionaries were left with the challenge of piecing together a fractured society, and they soon found that beheading a monarch was simpler than governing a nation. The power vacuum left by the monarchy was filled with chaos and bloodshed, a messy transition that would see France stumble through the reign of terror, the rise of Napoleon, and a few more regime changes than you can count on one hand. Little did they know, the guillotine would become the new monarch, a symbol of revolutionary justice that spared no one, not even its champions. Marie Antoinette's legacy is a tapestry of contradictions. On one hand, she remains a symbol of royal indifference and excess, a queen whose spending habits were as out of control as a runaway carriage. On the other, she's a cautionary tale of what happens when perception trumps reality. Let's be honest, much of what we remember about her, the infamous "let them eat cake" line, her supposed indifference to the plight of the poor, is more myth than fact. That phrase, for instance, never left her lips. It was a catchy line, sure, but it was about as accurate as a weather forecast. But myths have a funny way of sticking around, and Marie Antoinette has been both romanticized and villainized in popular culture. She's been portrayed as everything from a naive young girl swept up in the politics of her time to a manipulative power player hell-bent on maintaining her luxurious lifestyle. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in between. She was a product of her time, a queen caught in the crossfire of history, trying to navigate a world that was changing faster than a Parisian fashion trend. Her story has been the subject of countless books, films, and even an opera or two, each adding its own layer to the legend. Sofia Coppola's 2006 film, Marie Antoinette, painted her as a misunderstood teenager thrust into a role she never asked for, a modern-day pop icon trapped in an 18th century world. Meanwhile, historical accounts often focus on her role as a political scapegoat, the foreign queen whose influence was blown out of proportion by a nation hungry for change. In life as in death, Marie Antoinette remains an enigma, a queen whose life was as much about what people thought she was as what she actually did. The monarchy's downfall was a lesson in the dangers of excess and the power of public perception. The French Revolution was a wake-up call for the rest of Europe, a reminder that even the most entrenched systems of power could be toppled by the will of the people. Marie Antoinette's execution sent shockwaves through the royal courts of Europe, a stark warning that their thrones were not as unassailable as they might have liked to believe. It was a reminder that the gap between the rulers and the ruled was a chasm that could swallow even the mightiest of monarchies. And yet, for all the revolutionary fervor, the French Revolution didn't exactly usher in a utopia. Instead, it paved the way for the rise of Napoleon, whose vision of empire would see France embroiled in wars across the continent. The monarchy itself would make a comeback, albeit in a diminished form, as the Bourbon Restoration brought a return to royal rule in 1814. It turns out, the headless monarchy had a way of rising from the grave, a reminder that revolutions often replace one form of power with another. In the end, Marie Antoinette's life serves as a cautionary tale about the power of myth and the dangers of losing touch with reality. Her legacy is a lesson in how history is often less about the facts and more about the stories we choose to tell. We remember her as the queen who lost her head, both literally and metaphorically. But the truth is far more nuanced. It was a woman navigating a world that was changing faster than she could adapt, a queen caught in the crossfire of revolution, and a figure whose life was as complex as the history she became a part of. So there you have it, the life and times of Marie Antoinette, a queen whose story continues to captivate and caution us even today. Her life was a testament to the power of perception, a reminder that history is as much about the legends we create as the facts we preserve. As we close the chapter on Marie Antoinette, let's remember that her story is more than just a tale of royal excess. It's a reflection of a world in transition, a reminder that the past is never as far away as it seems. The ancient Mesopotamian bazaar, a place where the scent of spices mingled with the not-so-subtle aroma of livestock, and if you were lucky, the occasional whiff of freshly baked bread. Here, commerce was as vibrant and loud as a modern-day stock exchange, minus the suits and Bluetooth headsets. You'd be hard-pressed to find a more fitting setting for the world's first economic experiments. In the bustling streets of Europe, traders haggled over everything from barley to textiles, navigating the chaos with the same finesse you'd expect from someone trying to find a parking spot on Black Friday. Now, let's talk about the clay tablets, those chunky, hard-to-pocket devices that were the original spreadsheets. Forget Excel. In Mesopotamia, if you wanted to keep track of your sheep trades or grain counts, you had to engrave your numbers into a slab of wet clay with a stylus. It was like chiseling out a tweet, but with way more commitment and zero chance of going viral. These tablets were crucial, allowing the Sumerians to record transactions, debts, and even poetry, because who doesn't love a little epic verse with their bean counting? The Sumerians, ever the innovators, didn't just stop at clay tablets. They were the real OGs of business savvy, turning the barter system into a sophisticated network of trade routes that spanned from the Tigris to the Euphrates. Picture this. You've got an overstock of goats, but a desperate need for some fine Yurok pottery. No worries. Just head down to your local bazaar, where you could trade a couple of bleeding companions for that sleek ceramic masterpiece. It's the ultimate swap meet, with a touch of Mesopotamian flair. But let's address the elephant, or rather, the sheep in the room, the absurdity of trading livestock for goods like beer. Yes, beer. A staple that was practically considered liquid bread, and just as important to the Mesopotamians as water is to a fish. They would trade a sheep or two for a decent supply, which might sound ludicrous to us now. But back then, it was a perfectly reasonable way to quench one's thirst. And who can blame them? After a hard day of chiseling cuneiform, a frothy ale was probably just what the ancient accountant ordered. Now let's dive into the role of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. These waterways were the lifeblood of Mesopotamia, the ancient equivalent of an interstate highway system. Without them, the trade network would have been as sluggish as a dial-up connection. They facilitated movement, allowed cities to flourish, and ensured that goods could flow as freely as the rivers themselves. This wasn't just about convenience. It was about survival and prosperity. If the rivers were the veins, then trade was the heartbeat of Mesopotamian civilization. And here's a fun nugget of trivia. The Mesopotamians had an obsession with lapis lazuli, that deep blue semi-precious stone that was the bling of the Bronze Age. This wasn't just your average rock. It was imported from as far away as Afghanistan, covering distances of over 500 miles. Picture a camel caravan trudging across deserts and mountains just to bring a bit of sparkle to the palaces of Ur. It was the ultimate status symbol, a way for kings and priests to say, "Look at me, I'm fancy," without uttering a single word. In the grand tapestry of history, Mesopotamian trade wasn't just about goods and services. It was about the exchange of ideas, cultures, and innovations. Their trade routes were the original information superhighway, spreading technology and culture faster than you could say, "I invented the wheel." And yet, as romantic as this all sounds, there was a harsh reality underpinning it. The reliance on trade meant that cities were vulnerable to disruptions. A bad harvest or a blocked trade route could send shockwaves through the economy, a reminder that the prosperity of this ancient civilization was as fragile as the clay tablets they wrote on. So, the next time you check your bank account or swipe your credit card, spare a thought for those ancient merchants, bartering sheep for barley and chiseling their accounts into clay. They were the true pioneers of trade, and without their innovations, we might still be swapping goats for groceries. And let's be honest, nobody wants to explain that transaction at the checkout line. Just as those ancient merchants paved the way for our modern fiscal follies, they were also the original influencers, strolling through bazaars with all the swagger of a hipster at a craft fair. When you think of influencers, perhaps you imagine someone posing with a designer handbag or an exotic smoothie. But back in ancient Mesopotamia, traders were the ones setting trends, and they didn't need Instagram filters to spread the word. They had something much more powerful, the art of storytelling and the irresistible allure of exotic goods. Consider cuneiform, the original written language that was spreading like wildfire across Mesopotamia, much like a viral TikTok dance today. Traders, with their clay tablets in tow, helped disseminate this script far and wide. Cuneiform wasn't just a way to record transactions, it was a cultural transmission tool. A merchant might return from a distant land with tales of wondrous architecture or peculiar customs, inscribing these stories alongside their inventory of wool and barley. These tablets became the ancient equivalent of a news feed, giving people glimpses into far-off worlds without the need for a passport. Speaking of wool, let's delve into the Mesopotamian fashion scene. Spoiler alert, it was all about that woolen weave. Forget about silk or cotton. Wool was the fabric of choice, and it was all the rage. Why, you ask? Simple economics. Wool was locally available, durable, and could be dyed into vibrant colors, perfect for those looking to make a statement at the local ziggurat. The fashion-conscious citizens of Uruk and beyond strutted their stuff in tunics and cloaks, proving that even in 3000 BCE, people were willing to suffer for style. Just imagine the sheepish grin on the face of the shepherd whose flock was in high demand for the latest fashion craze. Now, let's address the logistics of ancient trade. Forget next-day delivery. Transporting goods in Mesopotamia was a logistical nightmare that makes modern supply chain issues look like a cakewalk. Picture this: a caravan of donkeys loaded with goods, trudging along dusty tracks at a pace that would frustrate even the most patient of couriers. These beasts of burden were the unsung heroes of the trade routes, their bells jingling as they carried everything from lapis lazuli to woven textiles. But the journey was fraught with challenges: bandits, rough terrain, and that all-too-familiar concern, tariffs. Yes, trade tariffs, the bane of commerce since time immemorial. Mesopotamian traders faced tolls and taxes at every pass, city gate, and river crossing. Each city-state had its own rules, making trade negotiations as labyrinthine as a modern tax code. You could say they were the original red tape warriors, navigating bureaucratic obstacles with the tenacity of a terrier on a squirrel hunt. And let's not forget the haggling. Oh, the haggling, an art form in itself, where traders would spar over prices with the same fervor as a modern-day auctioneer. It was all part of the game, a dance as old as commerce itself. Did these traders grumble about the challenges? Absolutely. But they also reveled in the thrill of the exchange, the excitement of bringing home goods and stories from distant lands. They were the conduits of culture, the ones who brought news of innovations and ideas, fueling the fires of progress. It wasn't just goods that changed hands. It was knowledge, language, and tradition. In a way, these traders were the unsung architects of the cultural melting pot that was Mesopotamia. Trade was not just an economic necessity. It was a social and cultural lifeline. The bustling marketplaces were melting pots where people from different backgrounds mingled, shared ideas, and influenced each other. The linguistic exchange alone was monumental, with cuneiform serving as the lingua franca for merchants and scribes alike. This script was a unifying force, allowing disparate cultures to communicate and collaborate in ways previously unimaginable. So, next time you complain about a package delay or grumble over a customs fee, spare a thought for those ancient traders. They were the ones who braved the elements, navigated complex trade networks, and brought the world a little closer together. Their tales of adventure and perseverance remind us that while technology may have advanced, the core of human endeavor remains the same. It's all about connection, exchange, and the relentless pursuit of something new. And with that, we'll leave you hanging, ready to dive deeper into the world of ancient trade and cultural exchange in the next installment. Speaking of connection, let's dive headfirst into the political quagmire that was Mesopotamian trade. Imagine, if you will, city-states like Ur and Babylon, each sitting on their dusty thrones, plotting how to out-trade their neighbors while looking as benevolent as a cat presenting you with a freshly caught mouse. Trade wasn't just about spices and textiles. It was a masterstroke of political chess, with each city-state maneuvering its knights, bishops, and pawns across a board that spanned the Fertile Crescent. Take Babylon, for instance. This city-state wasn't just content with being a trade hub, it wanted to be the asterisk trade hub. Picture a bustling metropolis around 1800 BCE, where Hammurabi, yes, the eye for an eye guy, was king. But Hammurabi wasn't just about harsh laws. He was a shrewd economist, using trade to wield power like a maestro conducting an orchestra. Through strategic alliances and savvy trade agreements, he expanded Babylon's influence far beyond its walls. Remember the Code of Hammurabi. It wasn't just a legal document. It was a PR campaign, projecting Babylon as a bastion of order and prosperity, luring merchants like moths to a flame. And then there was the city-state that could have taught a masterclass in playing both sides against the middle. Was the epicenter of trade around 2100 BCE, and its rulers knew how to leverage commerce to bolster their political clout. They didn't just trade goods, they traded favors, offering diplomatic gifts that were as much about making allies as they were about flaunting wealth. Imagine receiving a lavish gift of lapis lazuli or an intricately woven textile. Was it a genuine gesture of goodwill, or was it a gentle reminder of Ur's economic might? Probably a bit of both. Now, let's not kid ourselves. These kings and rulers weren't the altruistic patrons of commerce that some might imagine. They had motives as transparent as a poorly executed poker face. Sure, trade brought prosperity to their cities, but it also filled their coffers and expanded their influence. In reality, they were less concerned with the welfare of the common merchant and more focused on the grand game of power. They were the original corporate moguls, stockpiling wealth and influence like they were collecting rare Parkayman cards, each trade route a new addition to their deck. Of course, trade negotiations were a comedy of errors waiting to happen. Picture a Babylonian envoy sweating bullets in the desert sun, trying to convince a Sumerian merchant that their tin was worth more than a sack of barley. The haggling was legendary. Imagine trying to sell a used camel as like new, or arguing that your pottery was of artisan quality, while conveniently ignoring the cracks. These negotiations were as much about bluff and bravado as they were about actual economics, a bit like playing poker with no cards, just a really good poker face. And let's talk about those diplomatic gifts. They weren't just tokens of goodwill, they were Trojan horses of political strategy. Gift-giving was the ancient equivalent of sliding into someone's DMs with a carefully curated message. If Babylon sent a gift to Assyria, it wasn't just to say hello. It was to remind them of Babylon's wealth and influence, a subtle hint that alliances were beneficial and dissent was, well, not recommended. These gifts were the original influencers, shaping political landscapes as deftly as a viral tweet. As we debunk the myth of the benevolent king, let's acknowledge the allure. It's tempting to imagine these rulers as wise patrons, fostering trade for the good of their people. But the truth is messier, more human. They were strategists, navigating the choppy waters of politics with an eye on their kingdom's bottom line. They weren't just building empires, they were crafting legacies, ensuring that their names would echo through the ages, even if the reality was less noble than the legend. In the grand scheme of things, Mesopotamian trade was a high-stakes game of diplomacy, where every deal was a potential power play. The bustling bazaars and intricate trade routes were just the surface of a deeper political strategy, one that shaped the course of history in ways both grand and subtle. And while the legends may paint a picture of kings as benevolent rulers, the reality is far more complex, a tapestry of ambition, power, and the relentless pursuit of influence. So next time you hear tales of ancient kings and their grand trade empires, take a moment to question the narrative. Look beyond the romanticized legends and consider the gritty reality of power, politics, and commerce. After all, history is written by the victors, but it's the clever strategists behind the scenes who really call the shots. And with that, we're poised to explore even more of these trade-fueled political machinations in our next chapter, where we'll unravel the interconnected web of Mesopotamian city-states and their relentless quest for dominance. And so, as Mesopotamian city-states bickered over trade routes like siblings fighting over the last slice of pizza, a new social strata began to emerge, the merchant class. Now, if you've ever wondered who really ruled the roost in ancient Mesopotamia, it wasn't just the kings with their grandiose titles and elaborate palaces. Oh no, it was these shrewd merchants who knew how to turn a profit faster than you can say Sumerian spreadsheet. Meet the merchant, the true rockstar of the Mesopotamian economy. These were the folks who transformed trade from a mere survival strategy into an art form. They weren't just exchanging goods, they were crafting legacies, one clay tablet at a time. Picture a merchant weaving through the bustling lanes of Uruk, tablet in hand, ready to negotiate a deal that could make or break the month's bottom line. It was like Wall Street, but with more donkeys and fewer insider trading scandals. But let's be real here. While merchants were counting their silver shekels, there was an entire underclass toiling away to keep the wheels of commerce turning. Into the artisans and slaves, the unsung heroes who made sure those shiny goods were actually worth trading. Artisans were the creative powerhouses, crafting everything from pottery to intricate textiles. These weren't your run-of-the-mill craftspeople. They were the Michelangelos of Mesopotamia, turning lumps of clay and threads of wool into high-demand masterpieces. And what did they get in return? A pat on the back and just enough barley to feed their families. Now, here's the kicker. Artisans were often stuck in a cycle of dependency. They relied on merchants to sell their goods, while merchants relied on artisans to produce high-quality items. It was a symbiotic relationship, but with the artisans getting the short end of the stick more often than not. If you think unpaid internships are a modern invention, think again. Artisans were the original experience over compensation workforce, honing their craft in exchange for little more than survival. Then there were the slaves, whose stories are as much a part of the Mesopotamian tapestry as the grand palaces and epic tales. Unlike the artisans, slaves didn't have skills to barter with. They were the labor force that kept the entire operation afloat. Whether they were hauling goods along the dusty trade routes or working in the fields to produce the barley that fueled the economy, their contribution was as indispensable as it was undervalued. It's a cruel irony that the very foundation of Mesopotamian prosperity was built on the backs of those who saw the least of its benefits. But let's not get too misty-eyed. The rise of the merchant class wasn't just about economic growth. It was a seismic shift in social dynamics. Merchants wielded power not through birthright or military might, but through sheer financial acumen. They were the original self-made moguls, the Jeff Bezoses of the Bronze Age, whose influence extended far beyond the marketplace. With wealth came power, and with power came the ability to shape policy and occasionally bend the rules in their favor. Yes, it turns out tax evasion is older than the pyramids. Now, let's talk numbers. Trade was big business, with some merchants amassing fortunes that would make a modern hedge fund manager green with envy. Single successful trade expedition could net a merchant up to 50 shekels, a small fortune at the time, considering a laborer might earn a mere half shekel per month. The disparity was as stark as a desert night, painting a vivid picture of economic inequality that feels all too familiar today. But here's where things get interesting. While merchants were busy raking in the dough, they were also unwittingly setting the stage for social upheaval. As their wealth and influence grew, so did the resentment from the lower classes. You could say that Mesopotamia had its own version of the 99% movement, with artisans and laborers acutely aware of the economic chasm that separated them from their wealthier peers. It was a tension that simmered beneath the surface, a reminder that prosperity is often built on shaky foundations. Yet, despite the disparities, the allure of the market was undeniable. The bazaar was a place of dreams, where the promise of wealth and prosperity was just a trade away. It was a heady mix of opportunity and exploitation, where fortunes could be made and lost with the turn of a pottery wheel or the stroke of a stylus. And while the reality was far from the romantic ideal, the myth of the market persisted, offering a tantalizing glimpse of what could be. So, as we peel back the layers of Mesopotamian society, it's clear that trade was more than just an economic necessity. It was a complex web of social interactions and power dynamics. Merchants may have held the purse strings, but it was the artisans and slaves who kept the show running. And while the market's facade was one of exotic goods and bustling stalls, the reality was a testament to human resilience and ingenuity, a reminder that the wheels of commerce turn on the labor of many, not the wealth of a few. As we close this chapter, we're left pondering the true cost of prosperity in ancient Mesopotamia. Was it the merchants who paid the price, risking life and limb on treacherous trade routes? Or was it the artisans and slaves, whose toil and creativity were the backbone of the economy? Perhaps it's a bit of both, a delicate balance of ambition and exploitation that continues to shape societies to this day. And while we may have only scratched the surface of Mesopotamian trade and society, rest assured there's plenty more to uncover. As we continue our journey through the ancient world, we'll delve deeper into the intricacies of commerce, exploring how these early economic experiments laid the groundwork for the complex systems we navigate today. So stay tuned, because the story of Mesopotamian trade is far from over. And so, As we journey deeper into the annals of Mesopotamian history, we find ourselves at a crossroads where trade and culture intersect in a manner that feels eerily familiar to today's globalized world. You see, Mesopotamia wasn't just the cradle of civilization. It was the original melting pot, where ideas and goods flowed more freely than a politician at a fundraising dinner. This ancient land, nestled between the Tigris and Euphrates, was the birthplace of many things we take for granted today. Riding, the wheel, and what could arguably be called the first prototype of capitalism. But before we get too misty-eyed over cuneiform and ziggurats, let's debunk a few myths about Mesopotamian perfection. For starters, this wasn't some utopian society where everyone held hands and sang songs about prosperity. The truth is messier, filled with more drama than a reality TV show. Yes, the Mesopotamians were pioneers of trade, but they were also human, prone to the same flaws and follies that plague us today. Take the notion of trade routes. We like to think of them as well-oiled machines, smoothly transporting goods from one point to another. In reality, these routes were more like a game of snakes and ladders, with traders constantly navigating the perils of bandits, taxes, and the ever-unpredictable whims of nature. One flood, and boom, your shipment of barley is floating down the Euphrates. Not exactly the seamless Amazon Prime experience. And then there's the romanticized image of the bustling bazaar, a place where cultures mingled like a well-crafted cocktail. While it's true that marketplaces were vibrant hubs of exchange, they were also rife with conflict and competition. Picture a Black Friday sale, but instead of flat-screen TVs, people were fighting over sacks of grain. And while we're at it, let's not forget the haggling. Oh, the haggling. It was an art form, sure, but also a source of endless frustration, where prices were as stable as a teenager's mood. But let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Despite the chaos, these trade networks facilitated a cultural exchange that was nothing short of revolutionary. Picture a Mesopotamian trader returning from a distant land, his camel laden with exotic goods and his mind brimming with new ideas. This wasn't just commerce. It was the beginning of a global dialogue, a conversation that continues to shape our world today. Speaking of shaping the world, let's talk about the legacy of Mesopotamian culture. It's easy to dismiss those ancient clay tablets as relics of the past, but their impact is as tangible as the smartphone you're probably using to read this. The concepts of writing, mathematics, and law that emerged from this region laid the groundwork for modern civilization. Imagine trying to navigate today's world without basic arithmetic or legal frameworks. It would be like trying to text without autocorrect, a total disaster. The Mesopotamians also left us with a more subtle legacy, the interplay of commerce and culture. This ancient civilization understood that trade was more than just a means to an end. It was a catalyst for cultural growth and innovation. As merchants traveled the world, they didn't just exchange goods. They exchanged ideas, philosophies, and technologies. It was globalization before globalization was even a word. Of course, this cross-cultural exchange wasn't always harmonious. It was as fraught with tension and misunderstanding as a Thanksgiving dinner with the in-laws. But it was also incredibly productive, leading to technological advancements that would shape the course of history. From the invention of the wheel to the development of the first written language, Mesopotamian innovations continue to echo through the ages. And what about the economic disparities that characterized Mesopotamian society? It's tempting to view them as relics of a bygone era, but they serve as a reminder that some things never change. The wealth gap between merchants and laborers was as stark then as it is now, a testament to the enduring nature of economic inequality. It's a sobering thought, but also a call to action, urging us to address these issues in our own time. So, what can we learn from the Mesopotamians? For starters, they teach us that progress is a messy, imperfect thing, full of false starts and unexpected setbacks. But they also remind us that the pursuit of knowledge and innovation is a noble endeavor, one that has the power to transform societies and shape the future. As we wrap up our journey through ancient Mesopotamia, we're left with a deeper appreciation for the complexities of trade and culture. It's a story of human ingenuity and resilience, of civilizations rising and falling, and of the timeless dance between commerce and culture. And while the world has changed dramatically since the days of Ur and Babylon, the core principles of trade remain the same. Connection, exchange, and the relentless pursuit of something new. So next time you find yourself scrolling through an online marketplace or negotiating a deal, remember the merchants of Mesopotamia, who blazed a trail for the global economy we know today. Their legacy is a testament to the power of trade to unite people across time and space, a reminder that even in the midst of chaos and competition, there is beauty in the exchange of goods and ideas. And with that, we close the chapter on ancient Mesopotamia, leaving you with a newfound appreciation for the past and a curiosity for what comes next in the ever-evolving story of human civilization. You're jolted awake by a symphony of bleeding goats and the unmistakable snorts of a few grumpy pigs. Welcome to the start of a bustling day in your Viking longhouse, where privacy is a mythical concept and communal living is the name of the game. As you blink the sleep from your eyes, the earthy scent of timber, smoke, and livestock fills your nostrils, a sensory reminder that you're sharing space with everything from your third cousin to the family cow. Cozy, right. Let's start with the longhouse itself, the architectural marvel you call home. Forget the idea of a ramshackle hut. This is no rough-and-tumble shack. Measuring anywhere from 16 to 23 meters long and around 5 meters wide, the Viking longhouse was the ultimate multi-purpose space, long before open floor plans were a thing. Constructed predominantly from wood and turf, these sturdy structures were built to withstand the brutal Scandinavian winters, where temperatures could drop to a bone-chilling -30 degrees Celsius. You think the Vikings might have been barbarians, but their buildings suggest a different story, one of sophistication and ingenuity. By the way, the thick walls weren't just for insulation. They were made from wattle and daub, interwoven wooden strips covered with a sticky mixture of clay, sand, and straw. Think of it as the original eco-friendly home design. The roof, constructed from overlapping wooden shingles or thatched with straw, offering a surprisingly effective barrier against rain and snow. This wasn't just a roof over your head. It was a testament to the Vikings' mastery over their environment, a big middle finger to the elements. As you stumble out of your straw-stuffed bed, you notice the longhouse is divided into sections. One end of the house is reserved for the animals, because why not keep your beef on hoof right at your doorstep? The other end is where your extended family resides, in a series of sleeping areas separated by simple wooden partitions. In the middle, the hearth, the beating heart of the household. This is where meals are cooked, stories are told, and warmth is shared. It's also the closest anyone gets to central heating, so gather round. Now let's smash a myth while we're at it. The notion of the unkempt, wild-eyed Viking. Sure, they were fierce warriors, but they were also farmers, traders, and craftsmen. The longhouse was a reflection of this complexity. It was a place of both domestic bliss and brutal practicality. Here, everyone pitched in, from mending nets to weaving fabric. The craftsmanship on display was nothing short of artistic. Wooden carvings adorned the interiors, showcasing intricate designs that were as much about flaunting skills as they were about warding off evil spirits. Yes, even Vikings liked a bit of home decor. As the morning light filters through the narrow smoke hole in the roof, you begin to see the longhouse as more than just a home. It's a microcosm of Viking society itself, a place where social structures are as layered as the wooden beams holding up the roof. Every member of the household has a role, from the youngest child herding sheep to the elders passing down sagas by firelight. It's a communal effort, a shared existence that leaves little room for the kind of individualism we idolize today. Yet, let's not romanticize it too much. Sharing close quarters with everyone and their dog, literally, isn't all sunshine and Norse poems. Privacy is a luxury and personal space. Well, that's as mythical as a dragon. You're constantly surrounded by the sounds and smells of daily life. But hey, at least you'll never feel lonely, right? And let's talk hygiene, a favorite topic when debunking the myth of the dirty Viking. Bathing was a weekly affair, usually on a Saturday, which they called Lorgardaga, literally, bath day. Vikings were cleaner than most of their European contemporaries, and their grooming habits included combing their hair and beards, a point of pride among Norsemen. So next time you hear someone say, Vikings were filthy, feel free to casually drop that knowledge bomb. As you move through the longhouse, you might notice the occasional carved dragon head or intricate knot pattern, each with its own story and purpose. These weren't just for show. They were deeply symbolic, representing protection, power, or a connection to the divine. This was a world where the spiritual and the physical were intertwined, where every plank and beam had a tale to tell. By mid-morning, the Longhouse is alive with activity. Children scamper about, women weave and men prepare for whatever the day demands, perhaps a bit of trading or a hunting expedition. The air is thick with the smell of porridge cooking over the hearth, a simple meal that fuels the Viking spirit. It's a humble breakfast, but one that speaks to the resourcefulness and adaptability of these people. As you settle into another day in the Longhouse, take a moment to appreciate the balance of chaos and order that defines this world. It's a lifestyle that's both harsh and harmonious, a testament to the Vikings' ability to thrive in a land where the weather seems to have a personal vendetta against human comfort. And while you might not have the luxury of personal space or cutting-edge technology, you do have something that modern life often lacks, a profound sense of community, a connection to your surroundings, and a deep respect for the forces of nature. Think of it as the original Scandinavian lifestyle, a bit less hig and a tad more hardy. So, as you ponder the day ahead, remember this. Living in a Viking longhouse is less about surviving history and more about being a part of it, one goat bleat at a time. And speaking of goats, it's about time we talk breakfast, because all that livestock noise isn't just for atmosphere. Welcome to the Viking dining experience, a culinary adventure where pickiness is not an option and every meal is a testament to survival skills. Forget your avocado toast and kale smoothies. Today, we're diving into the Viking pantry, where the staples are as humble as they are hardy. Now, before your modern sensibilities recoil at the thought of medieval porridge, let's set the stage. Picture a bowl of barley or rye porridge steaming away over the hearth. It's the Viking version of a power breakfast. Barley, in particular, was the grain of choice, and not just because it was hardy enough to withstand the Nordic climate. This stuff was versatile, popping up in everything from bread to ale, making it the Swiss Army knife of Viking cuisine. So, when you scoop up that first spoonful of porridge, remember, this humble grain was the backbone of Norse sustenance. Let's sprinkle a little humor on this historical breakfast. In today's world, Viking porridge could easily be rebranded as an artisanal whole-grain delight with a price tag to match. Yet, for our Norse forebears, it was simply a matter of scraping together enough calories to face the day. The lack of sugar and cinnamon might make it less Instagram-worthy, but it sure did the trick when it came to keeping a Viking warrior on his feet. Now, let's talk about meat. Yes, Vikings loved their meat, but before you envision a medieval BBQ pit, let's debunk the myth of the carnivorous Norseman. Meat was a treat, not a staple, and it was reserved for special occasions or particularly successful hunts. Don't picture a feast without also picturing a lot of fish, because let's face it, when you're surrounded by the sea, seafood becomes a significant part of the diet. Herring, anyone, maybe not your first choice, but this oily fish was a Viking favorite, packed with nutrients and relatively easy to catch. Preservation was the name of the game when it came to meat. Without the luxury of a refrigerator, Vikings got creative. Enter the smokehouse, the ancient predecessor to your fancy smoked meat section at the grocery store. Smoking, drying, and salting were the trifecta of Viking preservation techniques, crucial for surviving those endless winters. So, while you're chewing on your dried fish or salted pork, remember, you're not just eating, you're participating in a time-honored tradition of making sure food doesn't turn into a science experiment. For those with a sweet tooth, don't expect honey drizzled on your morning meal. Honey was a luxury, often reserved for mead making. If you were lucky, you might find some berries to toss into your porridge, wild blueberries or lingonberries, adding a tart zing to the otherwise bland fare. It's the original farm-to-table concept, minus the marketing hype. And here's a fun twist. Viking cuisine might actually be closer to modern culinary trends than you'd think. With an emphasis on whole grains, locally sourced ingredients, and protein-packed fish, you could say the Vikings were paleo before it was cool. They were the ultimate locavores, not by choice, but by necessity. While today's chefs might romanticize this back-to-basics approach, for the Vikings, it was all about survival in a harsh, unforgiving landscape. Speaking of survival, let's get into the gritty details of farming in the Viking Age. Agriculture was both an art and a gamble. With short growing seasons and unpredictable weather, it was a constant battle against the elements. Barley and rye were the go-to crops because they could withstand the cold and were versatile enough to be used in multiple ways. But don't underestimate the challenge of turning rocky, frost-covered soil into arable farmland. It required grit, determination, and a fair amount of back-breaking labor. As you sip on a bowl of thin ale, yes, breakfast beer was a thing. Consider the economic context. Land was a precious commodity, and farming was a community effort. Everyone pitched in, from planting to harvest, and communal grain stores were vital for ensuring that no one starved during lean times. It was an economy of scale before we even knew what that meant, and the stakes were nothing less than life and death. Now, let's take a minute to appreciate the Vikings' knack for resourcefulness. When you don't have access to modern conveniences, you get creative. Take the humble root cellar, for instance. This was the medieval refrigerator, a cool, dark place where root vegetables like turnips and carrots could be stored for months. And while fermented foods might not be everyone's cup of tea, they were a staple in the Viking diet, providing essential nutrients when fresh produce was scarce. From pickled fish to sauerkraut, fermentation was both a preservation technique and a health booster. In a world where food wasn't just about sustenance, but a measure of wealth and status, every meal was a reflection of one's standing in the community. A chieftain's feast would be markedly different from a farmer's breakfast, with more meat, more mead, and more merriment. But regardless of social status, the shared meal was a time of bonding, storytelling, and perhaps a bit of friendly boasting about the size of one's catch or the yield of one's field. As you polish off your porridge and perhaps sneak a bite of smoked fish, take a moment to reflect on the Viking way of life. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine a world of epic feasts and legendary heroes, but the reality was often gritty, labor-intensive, and far from glamorous. Yet, there's something undeniably appealing about this rugged, communal existence. It's a lifestyle that demanded resilience, ingenuity, and a deep connection to the land and sea. A far cry from our modern lives of convenience and comfort. So, as the morning light filters into the Longhouse and the day unfolds, remember this. Every meal, every spoonful of porridge or bite of fish is a testament to the Viking spirit. A spirit that thrived in a world where survival was never guaranteed, but community and courage were always on the menu. And while they might not have had the luxury of a morning latte, they had something perhaps even more valuable, a sense of belonging, a connection to the earth, and the knowledge that, together, they could face whatever challenges lay ahead. And just when you think you've wrapped your head around Viking life, the real work begins. Mid-morning in a Viking longhouse is a flurry of activity that would make even the most seasoned multitasker break a sweat. Forget the image of a laid-back morning spent sipping ale by the hearth. This is when the community kicks into high gear, each person honing their craft or tackling chores with the precision of a well-oiled, albeit smoky machine. Let's dive headfirst into the heart of the Longhouse, where women wield surprising clout in this supposedly testosterone-driven society. Far from being the silent shadows behind the hulking figures of Viking warriors, women were the backbone of the community. They managed households, crafted textiles, and even held the keys to the family's wealth, literally. In a world where a well-woven cloak could mean the difference between life and a very chilly death, women's weaving skills were nothing short of vital. It might sound like an exaggeration, but weaving was an economic powerhouse, with textiles often being used as currency. So, you could say that women were the original financial planners, trading textiles like Wall Street brokers, minus the power suits. Speaking of textiles, let's not forget that Norse women were the queens of upcycling long before it was cool. They transformed wool into intricate patterns, using natural dyes from plants and minerals to create vibrant hues. It's not just about looking good, though. Those woolen garments were your first line of defense against the Scandinavian cold, making the weaver's craft as essential as it was artistic. And let's face it, when the mercury's plummeting, you'd be grateful for every expertly crafted stitch keeping frostbite at bay. Meanwhile, outside the Longhouse, the men are hard at work. But before you picture them sharpening axes for the next raid, let's set the record straight. Being a Viking wasn't all about pillaging coastal monasteries for kicks and giggles. In fact, farming and trade played a far more significant role in Viking life than those Hollywood sword fights ever did. For instance, Viking Age saw the rise of bustling trade hubs like Birka in Sweden and Hedeby in Denmark, where goods from as far as the Byzantine Empire changed hands. Silk, spices, and silver coins flowed through these centers, proving that while Vikings might have been fierce, They were also shrewd businessmen who knew how to turn a profit. Farming was the bread and butter, or should we say barley and herring, of the Viking economy. With such short growing seasons, every man, woman, and child was enlisted in the agricultural army. They ploughed fields, sowed seeds, and harvested crops with a tenacity that would make modern-day farmers tip their hats in respect. And when the land was too stubborn to yield grain, they turned to animal husbandry, raising cattle, sheep, and pigs with the same dedication. It's a testament to their resilience that they managed to coax sustenance from a landscape that seemed designed by nature to keep them on their toes. Now, let's bust another myth, the idea that Vikings were all brawn and no brains. This couldn't be further from the truth. Navigating the choppy waters of the North Sea required a solid understanding of the stars, tides, and weather patterns. It wasn't just about brute force. It was about strategy, skill, and a fair bit of innovation. Take, for example, the sun compasses and sunstones that used to find their way when the skies turned grey. These weren't the tools of simple-minded marauders. They were the instruments of seafaring pioneers who pushed the boundaries of their world. Back in the Longhouse, crafting is in full swing. Men and women alike are engaged in creating tools, weapons, and ornaments, each piece a testament to the craftsmanship that defined Norse culture. The blacksmith's forge is a hive of activity, where iron is transformed into everything from plowshares to swords. Here, the line between artisan and warrior blurs, as the same hands that shape a blade for battle might also craft a delicate brooch to adorn a cloak. It's a reminder that in Viking society, the practical was often intertwined with the beautiful, each object a reflection of its maker's skill and creativity. As the afternoon sun casts long shadows over the Longhouse, it's clear that this bustling community is far more complex than the stereotypes suggest. The economic and social roles within this society are intricately woven, each thread vital to the tapestry of Viking life. Women hold power in their craft and commerce, while men balance the roles of farmer, trader, and yes, occasionally, raider. It's a world where survival depends not just on strength and courage, but also on collaboration, ingenuity, and a deep connection to the land and sea. And while the myth of the Viking warrior may persist, the reality is far richer and more nuanced. It's a society where every member plays a part, where the fierce independence of the Norse spirit is matched only by their reliance on one another. In this communal world, the lines between hero and homemaker, conqueror and cultivator are blurred, creating a mosaic of human experiences rugged and enduring as the Scandinavian landscape itself. So, as the day wears on, and the Longhouse hums with the rhythm of life, remember this: the Vikings weren't just warriors. They were weavers, traders, farmers, and craftsmen. They were a people whose legacy is as much about community and creativity as it is about conquest. And while their world may seem distant from ours, their spirit of resilience and resourcefulness continues to inspire, reminding us that even in the harshest of environments, the human capacity to adapt and thrive remains unyielded. As the afternoon sun starts to dip below the horizon, casting a warm glow over the rugged Scandinavian landscape, you can almost feel the Longhouse exhale a collective sigh of relief. The day's labors are winding down, and it's time for the Vikings to embrace the other side of their multifaceted lives, a side that Hollywood often forgets in favor of clashing swords and roaring battles. It's time to talk about Viking leisure, a time when storytelling, games, and rituals took center stage, offering a glimpse into the rich cultural tapestry that these fierce seafarers wove as deftly as they did their sails. Let's start with storytelling, the Norse equivalent of Netflix. After a long day of toil, the hearth becomes the epicenter of communal life, where sagas are spun like the threads on a loom. These aren't your run-of-the-mill bedtime stories. We're talking epic narratives of gods and heroes, of creatures that make your average sea monster look like a guppy. The Skalds, or Viking poets, took their craft seriously, memorizing and reciting these tales with a flair that would put modern-day performers to shame. And they had to be good, mess up a line, and you might face the wrath of an audience well-versed in the art of heckling. But why all the focus on storytelling? Well, in a world without written records, these oral traditions were the lifeblood of Viking history and culture, ensuring that the exploits of Thor, Odin, and even their own ancestors were never forgotten. Through these tales, values were imparted, lessons were learned, and a shared identity was forged. It's a classic case of entertainment meets education, with a healthy dose of Norse mythology thrown in for good measure. So next time you binge-watch your favorite series, spare a thought for the Vikings, who mastered the art of the cliffhanger long before it was cool. As the Skald's voice echoes through the Longhouse, some Vikings might be engaged in less cerebral pursuits. Enter the world of Viking games, where strategy and skill take the spotlight. Nefertafel, a board game akin to chess, was a popular pastime. Known as King's Table, the game was a battle of wits, one side defending a king, the other attacking. It was the perfect metaphor for Viking life, a constant dance between offense and defense, strategy and chaos. And while the stakes weren't as high as those on a battlefield, you can bet the competition was fierce and the bragging rights priceless. But it wasn't just about mental gymnastics. Physical games were also a staple of Viking leisure, with activities that tested strength, agility, and sheer bravado. Wrestling was a crowd favorite, a chance to prove one's mettle without the risk of losing a limb to a wayward axe. And let's not forget the all-important tug-of-war, a game that transcended cultures and time periods, proving that sometimes all you need is a rope and a bit of friendly rivalry to keep spirits high. Yet leisure time wasn't all fun and games. For the Vikings, it was also a time of spiritual reflection and ritual, a chance to connect with the divine forces they believed shaped their world. And here's where we smash through the monolithic image of Viking spirituality that's often painted in broad strokes. Far from being a homogeneous belief system, Norse religion was as diverse as the people who practiced it. Yes, Odin and Thor were the headliners, but the pantheon was teeming with lesser-known deities, each with their own domain and following. Take, for example, Freyja, the goddess of love, beauty, and fertility. Her cult was particularly strong, especially among women, and she was often invoked in matters of the heart and harvest. Meanwhile, Njord, the god of the sea and seafaring, was venerated by those whose livelihoods depended on the fickle nature of the ocean. And let's not overlook Loki, the trickster god, whose antics provided as much entertainment as they did chaos. It's a spiritual landscape as rugged and varied as the terrain itself, where personal devotion often took precedence over organized worship. Religious rituals were woven into the fabric of Viking life, marking everything from the changing of the seasons to personal milestones like births and deaths. Blats, or sacrificial feasts, were held to honor the gods and secure their favor. Here, the community would gather to offer up animals, food, and even mead in a ceremonial act that was as much about communal bonding as it was about divine appeasement. It's a reminder that in a world where uncertainty was the only certainty, a little divine intervention never hurt. And speaking of appeasement, let's not forget the importance of the Sirisses, or Völvers, women who were believed to communicate with the divine. In a society where the future was as unpredictable as the northern weather, their visions were highly valued. These women wielded a power that transcended social norms, offering glimpses into the unknown and guidance to those who sought it. It's a testament to the complexity of Viking society, where roles were often fluid and power could be found in unexpected places. As the evening wears on, the Longhouse becomes a microcosm of Viking social and cultural life, a place where the lines between the mundane and the mystical blur. It's a world where myth and reality coexist, where leisure is as vital to survival as the daily grind. And while the Skalds continue to spin their tales and the games draw to a close, the sense of community remains unbroken, a testament to the Viking spirit of resilience and unity. In this dimly lit hall, you can almost hear the echoes of history, a reminder that the Vikings were more than just warriors. They were storytellers, gamers, and spiritual seekers, a people whose legacy is as multifaceted as the sagas they left behind. And as the firelight flickers against the carved wooden beams, casting shadows that dance like the ancient gods themselves, one thing is clear. In the Viking Longhouse, the past is always present, a living tapestry of adventure, faith, and fellowship. So as you sit by the hearth, warmed by the flames and the camaraderie of your fellow Vikings, remember this. While the world outside may be harsh and unforgiving, within these walls lies a community bound by shared stories, shared struggles, and a shared humanity that transcends time. And as the night deepens, and the Longhouse settles into a comfortable silence, you realize that in this world of epic tales and everyday heroes, The greatest saga of all is the one you're living. As you settle into the darkness of the Viking Longhouse, the embers of the day's activities still warm beneath the surface, it's time to delve into the quieter, yet equally fascinating world of nocturnal routines and the social dynamics that governed this ancient society. The Viking Longhouse was a place where every creak of wood and whisper of wind seemed to carry the weight of centuries, and as the night wears on, a different kind of life unfolds, a life less visible but no less vital. In the absence of electric lights, the Longhouse relies on the flicker of the hearth and the dim glow of oil lamps to navigate the night. These lamps, often crafted from soapstone or clay, burn fish or whale oil, creating an atmosphere that's both intimate and slightly smoky. It's a setting that might seem romantic until you remember that this is also a world where indoor plumbing is as mythical as the creatures in the sagas. Yet, it's this very dimness that fosters a deep sense of community, a closeness born out of necessity and practicality. The Longhouse is a masterclass in communal living, a concept that might make modern introverts cringe, but for the Vikings, it was the bedrock of survival. As the day gives way to night, the community comes together in a nightly ritual of unwritten laws and social norms. These aren't the kind of laws you'd find carved in stone. They're more like the unspoken rules of a family game night, understood by all, yet never officially codified. One such rule is the allocation of sleeping spaces. In a Longhouse, personal space is a luxury, and the arrangement is a delicate dance of hierarchy and necessity. The head of the household typically claims the most comfortable spot near the hearth, a position of both warmth and status. Meanwhile, the rest of the family, and in some cases, the extended kin, spread out on benches or beds filled with straw and animal hides. Privacy is a concept that exists more in theory than practice, but the close quarters foster a sense of belonging, an unyielding bond that transcends the boundaries of individual space. Children, often bundled together like a cozy pile of puppies, sleep soundly amidst the soft murmur of adult conversations. It's a world where bedtime stories come not from books, but from the lips of elders, weaving sagas of gods and heroes into the dreams of the young. And while the tales of Thor and Odin might seem fantastical, they're laced with moral lessons and cultural values, ensuring that even as sleep claims them, the children are learning the unwritten rules of their world. As the night deepens, the Longhouse becomes a microcosm of Viking society, a place where social dynamics play out in subtle gestures and shared silences. The roles within the household are as intricate as the knotwork carved into the beams overhead. Women, often the keepers of the family's wealth, hold sway over the domestic sphere, their influence extending far beyond the walls of the Longhouse. Meanwhile, men, whose roles range from warriors to farmers, engage in discussions that might touch on trade routes or the latest news from distant lands. Here, in the dim glow of the hearth, decisions are made, alliances are forged, and the future is quietly shaped. Yet, for all the camaraderie, it's important not to romanticize the Viking night. The reality is that life in a Longhouse is a constant balance of cooperation and conflict. Disputes over resources or personal slights could easily flare into arguments, and with everyone living in such close quarters, there's little room for grudges or unresolved tensions. That's where the concept of communal justice comes into play, a system that, while lacking formal courts, relies on the collective wisdom of the community to resolve disputes and maintain harmony. In many ways, it's a precursor to our modern notions of restorative justice, where reconciliation takes precedence over retribution. This brings us to another aspect of Viking society that often gets overshadowed by their warrior reputation, their sophisticated approach to legal matters. The Vikings had a strong tradition of law and order, with legal assemblies known as things, serving as the judicial and legislative bodies. Here, disputes were aired and judgments rendered, often with the aim of restoring balance rather than exacting punishment. It's a system that speaks to a deeper understanding of community, a recognition that in a world as harsh and unpredictable as theirs, unity is the greatest strength. As the night stretches on, the Longhouse becomes a place of quiet reflection, a time to rest and recharge for the challenges of the coming day. Yet, even in repose, the Vikings are never far from the natural world that shapes their existence. The sounds of the sea, the rustle of the wind, and the calls of nocturnal creatures form a backdrop to their dreams, a reminder of the interconnectedness of all things. It's a connection that's both spiritual and practical, a reflection of a people who see themselves as stewards of the land and sea rather than its conquerors. Now, let's tackle a topic that's often misunderstood: Viking hygiene. The stereotype of the filthy, unkempt Viking is as pervasive as it is inaccurate. In truth, the Norse took cleanliness seriously, especially by the standards of their time. Bathing was a weekly ritual, and grooming was an important aspect of daily life. Combs, made from bone or antler, were personal treasures, and hair was often washed with a soap made from animal fat and ash. These practices weren't just about vanity, they were a reflection of social status and personal discipline. Moreover, the Vikings were well aware of the health benefits of cleanliness. In an era where disease could easily decimate a community, maintaining hygiene was a matter of survival. It's an understanding that resonates with our modern world, where the importance of personal and public health has never been more apparent. So, the next time you hear someone dismiss the Vikings as dirty barbarians, feel free to enlighten them with the fact that the Norse were likely cleaner than many of their contemporaries in medieval Europe. As the first light of dawn begins to creep into the Longhouse, you can't help but marvel at the resilience and resourcefulness of these people. The Vikings were more than just raiders and warriors. They were a society built on community, creativity, and a profound connection to their environment. Their legacy is one of adaptability and innovation, a testament to the enduring human spirit. In many ways, the Viking Longhouse is a microcosm of the human experience, a place where the past and present converge, where stories are told, games are played, and bonds are forged. It's a world that, for all its differences, feels surprisingly familiar. The challenges they faced, the relationships they nurtured, and the values they upheld continue to echo through time, reminding us that while the world may change, the essence of humanity remains constant. So, as you leave the warmth of the Longhouse and step back into your own world, take with you the lessons of the Vikings. Remember the strength that comes from community, the wisdom in simplicity, and the courage to face the unknown with an open heart. And as the sagas of the North remind us, the greatest adventures are those lived in the company of others, bound by a shared story that transcends the ages.